Prologue. Crash. The silence of a bedroom filled with luxurious items was disrupted as a despondent-looking Eridel burst into the scene. He didn't seem to care about the items that had been felled in his path to his goal, his bed. You didn't need to look close to notice the bruises that could be seen on most of his exposed skin. For fuck's sake, Eridel muttered as he struggled to drag his clothes off of his obviously exhausted body. Scenes of the night rolled through his mind. Eridel had so many women that it was actually embarrassing. When one could claim to have 2 or 3 girlfriends, men would admire you and women would shame you on the outside, but secretly wonder what made you so great that you were capable of having multiple girlfriends in harmony on the inside. However, when the number of women you had actually managed to reach triple digits, you could only be looked at as a perverted wastrel. Most would sneer with disdain, completely unbelieving of the fact that you could satisfy so many women. And naturally Eridel wasn't any different. Even with the help of libido-boosting supplements, no one had the capability to keep 213 women satisfied. More importantly, it was even more impossible to keep most of these women emotionally invested in this sort of relationship where you are competing with 212 for time with one man. Ludicrous. But this fool kept increasing the tally. Just 2 hours ago, Eridel had been with a new girl that he had courted just 2 days ago. It had to be said that even if Eridel had nothing going for him, he had an extremely handsome face and a silver tongue. A being like him could seduce a girl very easily, especially when you took into consideration his other aspects. Anyhow, 2 hours ago, Eridel and his new conquest named Seal, a beautiful girl with a curvaceous figure and a gorgeous face, could be located in a love hotel making the sounds of oohs and ahs when the door burst open. Bang! A nice 7 feet big bald dude with a tattoo on the left side of his face and a scar on the other, he seemed to be dual-wielding the Tao of gangster, had literally kicked down the door. This man was dressed in a white tank top and faded baggy jeans. He also wore black Air Force Ones. Oh dear. What the fuck are you doing with my B*TCH, you bastard? And the rest is history. Eridel tutted in annoyance, wondering how big and violent even found him and how long it would take for his wounds to heal as he clambered in bed in just his underwear as he always sleeps. Despite the aching injuries, Eridel managed to sleep quite swiftly. Could Eridel have learned his lesson? Maybe he would cease to increase the amount of lovers he had. Or at least refrain from the ones that had already told him, I have a boyfriend but I don't care about him anymore. 20 hours later, it had to be asked, why had Eridel not woken up yet? His wounds were definitely not that severe, he shouldn't even be in a coma. Looking at his increasingly pale face and the lack of breath, he couldn't be dead right. 20 comments 0 vote. A new world. In an unknown galaxy containing 196 worlds, hid an undiscovered 197th. When it came to worlds, there were 4 grades: low, mid, high and law. Everything was graded and worlds, stars, galaxies and more could definitely not escape that. This new world was the lowest of the low, barely 10,000 years old and was already on the brink of destruction. This wasn't actually uncommon though. Numerous worlds rose and fell every day, and before a world could form its consciousness to steer everything towards perfection, anything can happen, and more often than not, self-destruction was the result. The world had naturally not formed a consciousness yet. Such a thing was reserved for high worlds and very, very rarely could you see one in a mid-world. So at least it wouldn't have to watch itself slowly die. But something changed. Something that would cause great changes in the fragile piece of this galaxy and usher everything into a new era. Something that looked like a golden star came shooting down from God knows where without a single sound. In just a moment the star had struck, or rather it seamlessly slipped into the world, causing it to shake and emit ripples in space that went on for thousands of miles, with this debilitated world at the center and no one to see before dissipating. Inside the world you could see that the reason for this reaction was that the entity had actually managed to finally collide with something after an unknown amount of time, which had caused the previously mentioned shaking. It had hit the world's core. And contrary to expectations, the entity did not blow apart the world, but it seemed to actually fuse with it. Despite the fact that the world had begun to shake at this moment, what occurred inside was very different. The previously wrathful volcanoes that seemed to want nothing but destruction suddenly turned docile, as if their grandfather had entered the room. The dense amount of smoke and smog in the surroundings slowly but visibly vanishing. Arrogant seas that put no other existence in their eyes, forming towering tsunamis and laying waste to the planet, abruptly dropped down to regular sea levels and soon after settling down, let out gentle and calming waves that seemed strangely placating. As if trying to soothe someone's ire. The earth that had previously been violently ruptured, with no vegetation on site, signifying the doom of the planet, had also started its own changes. Every single crack and every single unnaturally formed ravine and valley quickly started healing. The way it seemed to be frantically erasing the blemishes on the planet, even bursting out all manners of plant life, was like an employee whose unexpected boss had come in to see his dirty workstation and the employee tried to remedy all mistakes. Even more shocking was the actual plants that managed Revino. The old plants were done and dusted, but it seems from the very few remains, new plants were born, and those plants were rapidly proliferating all over the place. Even trees were rising up and becoming fully matured trees in mere minutes. But by some unimaginable means, there were areas that the plant life didn't invade, as if some force was making it that way. If you looked from afar, you could actually notice that these plants were actually not appearing in random places and were in fact incomprehensibly placed in such a way that it looked like beautiful and natural locations of nature. Grand forests, rain forests, plains and more had appeared, even oases had appeared in the deserts that had previously been arid beyond redemption but now looked like lustrous lands of sand. It was like the god of nature had decided to bless the entire planet, spreading harmony across the lands. But that was most certainly not the case. This seemingly peaceful and awe-inspiring scene would raise the hairs of the oldest of men and make the most fiendish of monsters scream in terror. And it was because of what this sequence of events meant. The entire process actually took 2 months to complete. Something that would normally be impossible actually happened so quickly. When a planet was on the path of destruction, only a high world and above had the ability to save itself. This was because it was not the same as a planet being damaged. Even if a planet was sliced in half, as long as the core was not damaged, the planet would only need time to heal and the help of residents could hasten the recovery. And even then, if the planet was as damaged as this one just was, even with the help of billions of residents that certainly would not be surviving in that environment, it would take centuries at best and often a few millennia for this kind of full restoration. But when the core of a world was damaged, no matter how small the damage, it was game over, and that was what was going on with this world too. The laws of destruction would invade the planet, its mere presence harmful to all lifeforms, and its ability to destroy planets unparalleled amongst the laws. It usually took only 1 year for the laws of destruction to end a mere low world, so this begs the question, how did this lowest of the low survive? Fortunately, no one was there to witness this sequence of events that defied all logic. Well, there was one person, Eridel. Good. An extremely ancient voice that sounded like it came from the depths of the earth sounded across the entire world. When Eridel died, his soul that should have normally gone through purification and reincarnation, which was the cleansing of all memories, defects and more before entering a new life form just seconds before its birth, was suddenly hit by something. It looked like a condensed ball of golden light the size of a baseball. Although this thing had somehow fused with him, turning his previously white-colored soul into gold-colored soul, it also harmed quite severely, and damaged souls were always a problem no matter how small. Eridel didn't even have time to swear before he blacked out. This was the point where fate had forever changed for Eridel. His soul was sent flying off into the distance, missing the rift that was supposed to cleanse his soul. Thankfully, whatever mutation occurred in his soul had given it passive self-healing abilities even if it was very slow. 2,000 years later, Eridel was fed up. His soul had perfectly healed 1990 years ago and he had naturally awoken again, but he was still flying like a shooting star. He figured that whatever happened after death shouldn't be so tedious. The first year he was fine, he was already mentally strong and could take the rare solitude. But it got worse and finally he started to get angry. Although he noticed that some type of energy seemed to be rising inside of him that he would later know as primordial essence, which was the source energy of all souls and should never be rising the way it was constantly now doing, he was no longer entertained by it. After 10 years of righteous fury came 2 years of despair. Something much worse than any amount of wrath-filled years. After those years something broke in him and he remained silent and accepted the situation, his mind becoming cold and very slightly primitive. In the remaining 1977 years, he had seen many things. He had even been attacked a few times by things that could still give him shivers even if he remained unharmed each time. The only thing that kept his mind sane and even improving it was the occasional upgrades that he felt. He didn't know what to call the feeling, but it came with bursts of euphoria that cleansed his depression completely before it began to accumulate again. He also noticed a substantial increase in both quantity and quality of the energy inside, but he didn't care at all. Such a useless thing, could it help him get women? He would even be happy to see his bastard dad at this point. What more interested him was the memories and instincts that he obtained each upgrade. Eridel now knew what the point of this endless journey was. And it was naturally to find a new body, something he guessed 1,000 years ago. However, the reason it took so long was because he was meant to collide with a core. Any type of core, whether it be in the form of a mana core, beast core, item origin, it had to be the core existence of something that could end up becoming a life form. It didn't matter if the life form already had a soul, because it would blink out of existence when he invaded. Eridel had to actually make contact with the core, not just the body of it, so you could imagine how hard it was when he couldn't even control his own bod soul. He had gone through a countless amount of worlds and even a few bodies, but he missed the core every time. It was just too frustrating. However, after 2,000 years, something changed. He finally made contact. This is my body now. Eridel was flabbergasted when he finally made connection with the core, and by association, the world. He had actually become an entire planet. A dying one too. He didn't even see it coming because he was asleep, something he did most of the time out of boredom. Shockingly, Eridel calmed down after half a minute, then started to get extremely excited, causing the world to shake in his primordial essence, the name he now knew the name of because of the memory inheritance, to release quite visibly. Eridel soon devoured the memories and instincts that every world should have in a mere 5 minutes, which was shocking when you looked at how much information there was. Centuries wouldn't be enough to digest that knowledge. However, if you could actually take a look at the level of his soul, it would seem normal. Looking at the vast amount of devastation on his body, Eridel began to move. He first put the remaining tenacious living beings into a coma, which we will talk about later. He used his primordial essence to forcefully contain the entire laws of destruction, but he didn't dissipate it, even if all he needed was a thought to do so. Despite how simple it sounded, it didn't look simple at all. Golden energy primordial essence filled the world, and wherever there was red energy destruction essence, golden energy contained it, eventually collecting it all until it was all compact into a ball of what looked like a very visible and very red gas. Surrounded and contained by a thin golden glass. These energies were originally very transparent, but when condensed to this extent, how could it not be visible? Surprisingly, the usually hyper-violent destruction laws didn't have the ability to resist at all. It could only roll around in its cage like a trapped ghost in a jar. The caged destruction laws were actually put next to the core of the world, which would give anyone heart palpitations, but looking at the completely stable golden cage, it was probably okay. I have plans for you, Eridel thought. He then began to heal his core, which also seemed effortless but would make anyone seeing scream in surprise. After this came the healing of the planet. Looking at the delicate planet, Eridel became frustrated. He knew that he couldn't just endlessly pump his energy into it because he knew that the brittle plane wouldn't be able to handle it. So he did it slowly, ordering the lands to use the energy to heal itself, the process taking 2 months. Eridel looked at his envisioned ideal planet that had become a reality and smiled in satisfaction, unaware of how horrendous and terrifying his actions were. Good. Eridel actually managed to speak out, something any world consciousness could do, if it actually had the ability to comprehend language. The only time you would hear a world's voice was when it was in severe pain. This could be a result of a powerful attack or more sinister means. While a world consciousness is extremely smart, smarter than any other life form, this also goes for Eridel, boosting his already high intelligence. They could not speak nor understand words at all. It never happened and it never will happen. Or that's how it was supposed to be. Being a human reincarnate, how could Eridel not know how to speak? This was just one insignificant bonus that Eridel had as a result of his reincarnated status. For now, Eridel looked at the last remaining species on his planet that he managed to keep alive in these 2 months with his boundless primordial essence. Seeing the essence of destruction that he didn't dare to remove from their bodies, Eridel frowned. 23 comments 0 vote. A shocking mutation. In a continent located in what could be considered as the center of the world that Eridel temporarily called the Central Continent, you could see a family of peculiar lizards. With a grand total of 71. Most of them were the regular gray color, but they were a whole 3 times bigger than usual at around 90 centimeters long. And their heads were certainly not like the average lizard, having a more protruding snout and 2 suspicious bumps on each side of their forehead. 9 of the 71 hatchlings were a dark shade of red, the exact color of the essence destruction. Despite being asleep, an aura of brutality could be sensed from them, and it didn't take much to guess the reason why. These lizards were even bigger than the gray ones, being 1.5 meters long, and the bumps on their head had actually been pierced to reveal onyx black horns, though they could barely be seen at the moment. Surprisingly, 2 of these dark red lizards were different from the rest, being a shocking 2 meters long and having horns a few centimeters longer. The scary thing about these horns was the fact that the essence of destruction seemed to swirl around them, looking like red fireflies were dancing around them. Eridel also noticed the 2 ridges on the back of these lizards. Looking at the horns and the developing skull structure, it didn't take much to guess what they were hiding. Are the lizards trying to become dragons? Eridel was both surprised and amused. It wasn't impossible for lizards to evolve into dragons if they lived long enough, had a fortunate encounter and kept evolving. But that was when magic energy had been awakened on the planet. That was when all life forms started evolving. Even then, it was still very rare for a lizard to become a dragon. It was very often for them to just keep growing every evolution and develop some special abilities. Eridel suddenly saw something that made him pause. Something other than the, even more, special case, that he'll mention later. The brutality around one of 2 special lizards was impossibly calm. It felt more like water, but this water was certainly not innocent and more of an entire sea that could consume you whole without making a commotion, inducing an instinctual fear in those in its presence. This lizard was female, so Eridel temporarily called her Calmilla. The other one had the most volatile brutality out of all of these lizards. It was like a raging flame that sought the destruction of everything. This one was obviously going to grow up to be an extremely wrathful being. Even now in its sleep, its face was twisted in anger. This lizard was male, so Eridel called him Eshma, named after the demon of wrath as an inside joke, but little did he know. How interesting. Eridel was very pleased with these surprises. Seeing how these 9 hatchlings were the ones that carried the densest residue essence of destruction in their bodies. Eridel had come to the conclusion that all of these lizards had been mutated. Eridel used his innate ability as a world to look at something that could only be described as World Archive. Everything that happened from the beginning of this world till now were recorded there. Going back a little more than 2 months ago, a hair-raisingly tenacious female lizard, although dying, had actually managed to give birth to a whopping 98 babies. But miraculously, whilst the lizards were still in their eggs and they were not completely formed, they had actually managed to gradually absorb the laws of destruction and develop a resistance while the egg shell took the brunt of the destruction essence. 10 of them even took it as far as to subconsciously develop varying levels of affinity with the law of destruction, only the Calmilla and Eshma reaching perfect affinity. It didn't need to be said that they were extremely talented. Unfortunately, one of the destruction lizards was too hasty and died in the process. The only reason these babies had managed to survive the essence of destruction coming in contact with them was because of the simple fact that the fate of the world relied on them. While it wouldn't stop the eventual end, if a low world lost all of its residents in that situation, the world would have been finished, no need to wait for everything to break apart. Residents were a world's bread and butter. Having no residents was just like having no blood. Only worlds that had just been formed had the grace period of 5,000 years to start producing life forms. On the other hand, a law world was completely fine, whether they had residents or not, all they served was to continue to boost their quality. Facing this precarious situation, the world instinctually saved them. Just this fact showed that the world had potential to become at least a high world. The fact that its instincts were active showed what could only be called talent. Eridel temporarily pondered on why such a world would self-destruct but decided to save it for later. When they were born, all but Calmilla and Eshma began to die. The laws of destruction were still present at this time, and despite the resistances, even the destruction lizards began to die, although at a much slower rate. This was because they weren't completely affiliated with the laws of destruction like their 2 siblings just yet. It would take just one evolution to rectify this, and even though the evolution wouldn't increase their levels of affinity with the laws of destruction, they would definitely become beings of destruction, gaining complete immunity. Unfortunately, they didn't have the time. Unsurprisingly, the lizards began to fight amongst themselves, most if not all the fights initiated by the destruction lizards. It was just in their nature and they weren't old enough to control their urges yet. Only Calmilla refrained from initiating fights, while surprising, wasn't too unexpected, giving her obvious traits. But the glint in her eyes as she watched the others was like a snake looking at prey. But this did not mean she didn't fight. Even though most would not dare to antagonize her, instinctively recognizing her supremacy, the same did not go for Eshma. That little shit wanted to fight everybody, resulting in 3 deaths amongst the regular lizards. This made Eridel slightly annoyed, but he naturally couldn't interfere. He wasn't even here yet, he was only able to watch the scene through the World Archive. After that, Eshma would only pick fights with Calmilla, showing a love for battle more than simply killing. If it wasn't for this, Eshma wouldn't be able to escape death. Eridel would never leave behind a being that liked to kill that much and endanger the last remaining species on his planet. Luckily, Calmilla was able to fend off the battle maniac and even gain the upper hand every time, showcasing her superior intelligence. But unfortunately the deaths didn't stop with 3. 1, 2, 3, 8, 13, a whole 20 more babies had died as a result of the laws of destruction, leaving their corpses all over the place. The rest of the lizards were getting weaker too, not just because of the laws of destruction, but because they didn't know how to eat yet. They were starving and beginning to lose vitality. 3 more of the hatchlings died. But Eridel wasn't worried, he had counted 71 before looking at the archives and knew no more deaths would occur. He just wondered how they learned to. I see, Calmilla had discovered how to eat. And as a result, so did the rest, Eshma especially eating with gusto on the corpses of his brethren. The lizards had begun to cannibalize. Eridel turned his attention to the anomaly. The only thing he couldn't explain. It was a lizard like the others, but not like the others. It was a lizard who for some reason, chose not to go through any sort of mutation but managed to survive. Looking like a regular lizard and with no hidden specialties. Yet, like the others, it absorbed the essences of destruction whilst in its egg. But it did not mutate like the others that were all walking on the path to becoming dragons. And yet, Eridel could clearly see that this lizard was somehow storing the laws of destruction, the ones it absorbed from its egg days. Despite the fact that this damaged the lizard faster than the others, it still managed to survive. The reason it was still breathing was probably because unless when eating, this lizard barely moved, it would just sit in one place, closing its eyes or watching the others most of the time. The only other time it would move was to stealthily escape when Eshma came close, surprisingly showing good survival skills. This obviously meant it was not retarded and had a well-functioning brain, so why did it hoard the essences of destruction and not fuse with them like its siblings? It didn't make any sense. Did it not wish to evolve? But that was impossible. No primitive species could fight the allure of evolution. It was obviously smart, even Calmilla copied its habits to preserve strength, so why? Boom. Ah, here I finally revived. Eridel watched as the past Eridel had started the restoration of the planet. When he watched the past Eridel notice the last living species, instilling them with his primordial essence to sustain their lives and put them in a coma, Eridel noticed something. Before the strange lizard had fallen asleep, it suddenly grinned, releasing the essences of destruction and making them fuse with his primordial essence. Eridel almost screamed. A mere lizard had actually fused a law essence with his soul essence. It was like trying to mix water with oil, it was impossible. But what was the situation? 14 comments 0 vote. Download the app for greater interaction. You can chat with me about my writing experience apart from the comments section. SolitaryMonarch. Download app now. Unbelievable. Eridel watched as this incomprehensible creature forcefully fused these 2 completely incompatible essences together. It was then Eridel remembered one of the lizards he saw that were completely different to the rest before he started looking at the archives. Golden scales and... Damn, what a freak. Eridel honed his gaze on the happenings of the lizard's actions. Finally noticing that things weren't exactly as it seemed. Looking at the 2 essences coming in contact with each other, Eridel immediately realized that it was not really a fusion, but This thing is actually using my primordial essence to change the properties of the laws of destruction. Eridel's ridiculously powerful mind almost froze from shock. Not only was this lizard performing these unfathomable actions, it was also doing it with shocking efficiency. Eridel was just too confused. He, a world consciousness, couldn't understand what was happening within him. It was at this moment that the laws of destruction, under the influence of his primordial essence, became the laws of creation, losing its dark red color and inherited the color of his primordial essence. Gold, though it could be said that the laws of creation were gold anyways. The firmly controlled and converted laws of creation was then fully absorbed and fused into the lizard's body, doing what it should have done inside the egg. It was finally choosing to evolve. At the same time, this was the moment that, past Eridel, sent the entire lizard race into a coma. Unbelievable. It obviously didn't matter that the lizard was put into a coma because the lizard had undergone its evolution process, taking a whole week to do so. Well, not that it mattered. Most life forms, especially the beast race, slept when they were evolving, so her coma-induced state might have even been a help. After the weekend, a vast change in scenery as a result of the healing lands, gold lights erupted out of the sleeping Liz-No dragon. It might not be a fully fledged one, but it was clearly becoming a dragon. The laws of creation flared out its body, creating a scene of raw and pure majesty, instilling awe into those in her presence. Even Eridel was impressed. The laws of creation are no joke. When the golden lights died down, it revealed an absolutely beautiful creature. 3 meters long with sleek golden scales, an elongated neck that its siblings had not achieved yet, a fully transformed dragon head complete with 10 centimeters tall horns, and like its 2 special siblings, it had achieved perfect affinity with Allah and had the horns to match, golden lights swirling around her 2 much lighter shade golden horns. Shockingly, this baby dragon that he could now identify as female had the claws to match, complete with the swirling lights and resplendent color. Eridel really had to appreciate the sight of these horns and claws. He could confidently say that they looked like they were carved out of gold and jade. It was too fantastical. But it was then that Eridel noticed something else. Because despite the laws of creation and destruction being on the same grade, she looked greater than her 2 special siblings of the opposite law. Bigger than them, more defined than them, transformed claws, even her tail was longer and thicker than her 2 siblings despite them all achieving perfect affinity in the same grade of laws. That was when he noticed. Eridel looked on with impassive eyes, promising to just take it in stride no matter what this creature did. This hatchling had actually managed to break through and awaken mana, further evolving one more time in the process as all animals did when they awakened mana. But that, although extremely bizarre because Eridel had not chosen to awaken this world's magical energy yet, was not the reason Eridel was unable to keep his recently promised impassiveness. Mana was worldly energy that had been converted in the body to enhance it and more. Obviously, you could perform magic and skills with it too, granted you had techniques and the required amount of energy. Magical energy was the first and most vastly spread worldly energy. On top of that, it was very versatile and much easier to wield than other world energies you could come across, so it was of course what all beings that didn't have race-specific energies like demon energy used to form mana. But there was no magical energy on this planet, so what did this freak of nature do? It decided and succeeded in using the essence of creation to form her mana. This meant that whatever she absorbed in future, would convert into her mana, which was made out of the laws of creation. While this would result in a slower cultivation speed, her powers had increased exponentially. She would very rarely ever find an equal in the same level even if she left for other worlds. But at this point, the more special this creature was, the more Eridel frowned. It was just too crazy. These were the kind of heaven-defying talents that he saw on anime and manga. What is the meaning of this? Did someone powerful reincarnate into this body and create this situation? Is she a protagonist? Eridel just decided to let it go. Even if she was a reincarnation, what could she do to him? In fact, it would be beneficial if they could trade knowledge in the future. He was a world, worlds don't fight, only the residents do. If only Eridel could see the future, he wouldn't be opening his stupid mouth to placate himself by saying, worlds don't fight. Eridel pondered for a few seconds before deciding. A beautiful creature with the ability to create, I shall name you Gaia. Giving someone such a name, it was obvious Eridel had grand plans for her. After coming up with a few calculations and fondly looking over the last species on his planet, Eridel retreated out of the archives. It's time to put a few of my increasing plans in action. 12 comments 0 vote. The truth about gods. As if he was removing fog off a window, Eridel removed the remaining essence of destruction from the regular hatchlings. At this point, they had no hope of gaining an affinity with those laws, and keeping it within their bodies would just slowly kill them. In future, it was indeed possible to gain affinity with the laws of destruction, and they even had better chances than any other life form, having experienced and even absorbing the laws whilst in their gestation stage. But unfortunately, it was very, very hard. Affinity was like talent, and such a thing could scarcely be changed after birth. That's why 9 out of 10 times, rich families inject all kinds of drugs, divine treasures and more directly into their childs while still in the womb in hopes to increase their natural talents. This would only ever benefit the child and never harm it if you knew the correct techniques. If you were foolish enough to mix in herbs with too much energy, or treasures that only suited specific races and weren't even the same as you could only blame yourself when the child directly blew up, killing the mother in the process, or even came out completely crippled. Eridel knew that the regular hatchlings had missed their most opportune time, and they wouldn't be able to gain affinity with destruction before that same destruction claimed their life first. They had their chance and they missed it, which was perfectly fine. Having 9 feet dragons of destruction with 2 of them reaching perfect affinity was already a blessing, and Eridel was satisfied. Eridel also left the other 7 feet dragons of destruction with the essence of destruction still inside their bodies. It was indeed still slowly killing them, but Eridel didn't care. It was not because he had confidence in his primordial essence removing the risk even though it did, but because he knew that they only needed their first true evolution, the one Gaia had already gone through, to become completely resistant, and that would happen when he awakened magical energy in the planet. Having the essence of their law in their bodies when they break through would be extremely beneficial and make the process smooth sailing. It may seem like what the hatchlings had gone through already was an evolution, but it was not. It was more of a half-evolution, commonly called a mutation. A mutation was something that occurred because an outside influence had forcefully upgraded you, changing you, but not on such a grand scale. An example of a mutation was a human consuming dragon blood and gaining horns and wings. An evolution came from cultivation, breaking your limits personally and causing a complete upgrade in your DNA. That was why Gaia was so much greater than her siblings. After looking back one more time at the slumbering up and coming dragon race, Eridel turned his attention back towards the rest of the world. Eridel had extremely stupendous plans for his planet. Ones that would cause immortals to hide and gods to fear, if they all came to fruition. But first, Eridel needed to start with the basics, creating more species. Like he said before, residents were a world's bread and butter. No residents, no progress. And with no progress, you could only wait for death. More on that later. For my first created species, let's go for snakes. Eridel used to have a pet snake in his last life that he was very fond of before it died. At the time he was 12 and cried for quite a long time. Even now, despite experiencing 2,000 years of solitude, he still got mildly agitated just thinking about it. Now, it is time to use my trump card, my own personal golden finger. The reason that Eridel was so excited after realizing he became a world was because he knew that it came with the ability to manipulate all the laws, granted you had the source energy for it. But here was the twist. There was not a single world that had any kind of source energy. Source energy was a personal energy that was generated from you and for your personal usage. Both of those two terms were key. A world awakening magical energy was not for them. It was for the residents. In fact, a world did not have a single lick of ability to wield magical energy. For worlds, awakening magical energy was like going through puberty. You had no say over it at all. So how did worlds try their best to manipulate laws? They don't have a chance to own source energy, so they looked for beings who did. The beings who were naturally born on their planet. When a talented individual had come to a world's attention, the world can decide to offer a contract. The God contract. A god was someone who had complete affinity and sole governance over one law in the world they were made in. They are now able to generate the essence of their law inside their bodies instead of having to absorb and convert magical energy into it. Completely meeting the criteria of being a source energy. But in truth, they had to follow the world's every whims and could never leave it. Why? That was because the contract ensures that in exchange for power, you must do my bidding. These contracts brand the soul of the god and if broken would kill the god in retaliation. That was why immortals disdained the gods, calling them slaves. Immortals were those that achieved the same stage of power, obtaining source energy, but completely by their own efforts. A god was also restricted in the changes they were allowed to make to the world, and ironically, this was because of the contract, something that a world actually had no control of. So while a world wields gods to control laws, the level of control is simplified so much they could only do the most basic things. Only the god of creation was the most useful to a world, but how can a mere life form like that possibly have enough energy to truly create anything relevant? When a world wanted to create a new species, they had to use the god of creation, the god of life, the god of death and all sorts of related gods, just to have enough energy to create two beings, one for each gender. Even then, each occasion would leave all involved gods on fumes for a very long time, we're talking century or two here. That's why they rarely did it. In the end, the one thing gods did the best was to defend. When other worlds invaded, they had to be extremely careful of the gods in their own domain. So when a god is out of commission, the world is naturally vulnerable. Just another reason why a world barely actually used their gods for anything and why they were so handicapped. But is that the situation for the great and mighty me? Nay. Eridel looked all over his lands greedily, thinking about the primordial essence that had never stopped generating inside of his soul since 2000 years ago. If he still had a face, it would look embarrassingly perverted at this moment. 16 comments 0 vote. Creating a new species. Eridel was ecstatic. May I remind you of what the characteristics of a source energy is again? Energy that you can freely generate and utilize. What was primordial essence? A type of soul energy that he had been generating passively for 2000 years. What did this mean for him who could innately control all laws? Anything was possible. Everything was in the palm of his hands so long as he had the energy for it. And he had energy, so much energy. To prove this point, the restoration of his planet only took 0.001% of it. God, what were these figures? A nonentity. Absolutely nothing to him. It was at that moment that he realized how powerful he was and why he was so happy now. With his abilities, would it not be possible to create his own avatar? Would it not be possible to forge the most talented divine body to cultivate? At that time, wouldn't he be a world and a person at the same time? Eridel was so exhilarated that the world started shaking again. Oops, anyhow, creating an avatar is far down the line anyways, I have to put my world on a path of supremacy first. A world that will eventually surpass the laws. Arrogance. In this entire galaxy, there are 197 worlds, but not one has surpassed the laws. If others knew of his thoughts they would laugh with disdain. Calming down again, Eridel began to harness various laws, hopes and dreams relying on the success of his current actions. The little dragon family currently lives in one of the largest forests in the world, located in the west of the central continent. Another forest of equal proportions was directly opposite, lying in the east. For them to be placed like that, Eridel naturally had plans for them to be placed like that. In a humongous 715 kilometers wide and 937 kilometers long cave near the center of the temporarily named Eastern Forest, a fantastical show that would break all logic began. A splendorous convergence of multiple colored lights appeared in various locations. Looking at the scene would leave even the darkest of creatures awed. But what was alarming was the extreme density of essence that was contained in those spectrum-like lights. It was obvious that these were the laws. As they swirled and danced around, they became more and more condensed, seemingly trying to form a shape. Faint whispers of an unintelligible language could soon be heard, serving to make the scene more mystical, becoming louder and louder as time passed. Boom! A loud resounding boom accompanied an explosion of pure golden light signifying the laws of creation and the completion of whatever actions were taking place. After peace was once again returned, something that would normally cause a normal person to flee was now the most wondrous sound Eridel had ever heard. SSS's. Inside the previously empty cave, more specifically the back end, where it was the most spacious, exactly 1,000 snakes of varying sizes and colors hissed and slithered around. New life. A shocking 1,000 new life forms in one go. Marvelous. Eridel's awe-inspiring and archaic voice was once again heard throughout the whole world. However, last time there was no one to hear it. Now, there were 1,000 living beings who were very much present, and definitely not asleep like their faraway predecessors. All of them were silenced in fear, now realizing that the powerful aura they had previously felt wasn't actually normal. They couldn't be blamed though. They were born mere seconds ago and had zero knowledge to speak of. Feeling that presence, which was a result of Eridel's full attention on them the entire time. So surely it's just how life should feel and it was normal, right? Well, it was not, and they now knew, recognizing the connection between the sound and the increase in pressure. Oops, sorry my lovelies. The sound was once again heard, but not as loud as before. More importantly, the presence they felt was no longer fear-inducing and majestic like before, and was now soft, soothing and fluffy like a. They don't know, but they now like the feeling of it. Eridel marveled at the sight of his creation. Actual lives. This is the beginning of everything. Eridel didn't consider any of his prior actions as monumental. What restoring the planet and clearing out the essence of destruction? What helping out a lizard become a dragon of creation? Could they compare to creating lives? Eridel honed his gaze on the largest snake here. Although each and every of those 1,000 snakes were of a different species and some were just naturally small or big. The snake Eridel was looking at was too big. 10 meters long to be exact. It was impossible for it to be just naturally big when it was just a mere juvenile like everyone else. And of course it wasn't. Although it looked like a king cobra, Eridel had tampered with its bloodline, giving it a special bloodline that could be upgraded the more the snake ate. Eridel called it the earth-devouring bloodline. Anything the snake ate would directly be converted into mana and slowly increase its size. There were more levels to this, but that was for the snake to unlock. Despite recognizing its gender as female, something he decided not to control, making it random for everyone, he called it Jormungandr. Which admittedly wasn't feminine at all, however, the name was too cool and perfect. Eridel decided she could be called Jorma for short. Apart from being gigantic, her scales were also pitch black, making any location a perfect hunting spot as long as it was nighttime. She also had alluring ruby red eyes that had a glint of dominance and innate superiority, giving it a lofty look which was further amplified by its majestic hood. Eridel nodded in satisfaction, turning to the other two special snakes that he created. The first one was a male, 4 meters long with vibrant amber scales, prideful golden eyes and a red mane on its head that seemed to be half made out of flames. The snake was also girthier than normal, making it look more dominant and masculine, which was cool, but he was too eye-catching. This made Eridel a little embarrassed. A snake that was supposed to rely on hunting to eat, looking at the snake that could be easily seen from a kilometer away, Eridel worried if it would starve to death. Despite things, it was clear that the snake had affinity with the element of fire, but in fact, it was the laws of fire it had affinity with, and it was a perfect affinity. There was a big difference between the element of fire and the law essence of fire. Need it be said which was more powerful? It would probably be able to eat just fine, probably. Eridel called him Draco. The last snake was female and also extremely eye-catching, this time both on purpose. This was the only snake whose gender he chose because of the bloodline he gave it. The name was called Malevolent Enchantress, and despite the term malevolent, it didn't mean it was innately cruel. But it did sound cool, right? This snake had the ability to attract anyone and put them in a daze. Because of its gender, it was much easier for it to attract both genders. Most males, even if they were attracted to another, would fight against that desire with all of his will, not wanting to be considered gay. It was just how guys were. But females did not have that problem. Most of the time they were perfectly fine admitting another female attractive, not even questioning their sexual orientation. Could it be said that females were more mentally stable? No, but more emotionally stable, maybe, who knows. This snake, who was 3 meters long, had pure white scales and seductive amethyst-colored eyes, would not have any issues attracting people and making them let their guards down. With its gentle and playful aura that was opposite to that of the prideful and domineering Draco. Most would not believe in its lethality or they would ignore it. On top of that, the snake that he gave the name, Lily, also had the ability to create illusions. A perfect assassin, one that wouldn't even need to hide. Eridel watched as the snakes gradually forgot him and started to turn their attention to the 3 obvious leaders. Jorma, Draco and Lily. Perfect, Eridel thought. 14 comments 0 vote. How could I not come bearing gifts? Month 4 of the first year, In these past 2 months, Eridel had spent the time creating all non-magical species that he knew of, filling the previously silent continents with noises that never ended. Animals could be found all over the world, filling it with life and nature. Something that fell incomplete before. From predators like lions and tigers, to prey like mice and sheep. All species from his home planet, Earth, were here. Something that the snake clan seemed excited about. In fact, Jorma was able to reach the first stage of cultivation, growing an entire 5 meters longer. From now on, the growth would be much slower. It only exploded like this because she broke into a new realm. This event meant that she obviously acquired mana. Now, taking into consideration that the world had no magical energy yet, it was obvious that this snake, that managed to solidify her status as queen, had not wasted the potential of her bloodline, directly converting food into mana. But besides that, everything else was pretty mundane. Although he created many new animals, he didn't make any of them special. No bloodlines, no augmented affinities, no nothing. If there was any talents amongst them, it was by their own luck. Eridel randomized everything. Something he should have done with the snakes too, but as his first created species, he couldn't hold himself back from doing something a little special. But despite that, he wasn't bored in the slightest. He didn't know if it was a world thing, but each increase in species filled him with immense satisfaction. But screw that. Now, it was time to take another step forward with his plans. Creating the first, enlightened, species. The race that will spur the progress of this world. The enlightened species were a race that had obtained complete sapience and potential to learn. This could be something like humans, elves or angels. Evolved beasts didn't count. They obtained their intelligence from their own abilities, not because it was an inherent trait of their species. And Eridel was not going to change that. It would be asinine to do so. Moving along, Eridel had to choose which race came first. Angels were crossed off because he had bigger plans for them later. So the remaining choice was between elves and humans. After thinking of the pros and cons for a while, he decided to start with the elves. The elves were a race that always positively affected their surroundings. A blessed race bearing a close affinity with nature in its entirety. Earth, wind, water and wood. All these elements that are considered nature were easily grasped by them. Although some could argue that fire was a part of nature. It was not. Fire was not natural. Numerous coincidences must occur for fire to naturally come into fruition. For example, lightning striking a tree, causing a fire. How could that be natural? In fact, elves had a higher affinity with the eccentric lightning element than they did with fire. But nowhere near as close to earth, wind, water and wood. But it could also be said that the reason it would be the case in this world was because Eridel willed it to be so. If he wanted to give the race major affinities with darkness, blood and undead, who was to stop him? They were created by him, and if he chose to change everything about them, he could. But Eridel would never create such abominations. Eridel was a really big fan of letting things naturally progress. Not because he was some 10,000-year-old fart who thought that messing with fate was dangerous. But because it was just so much more entertaining for people to do it themselves. It would be 100x to 1000x more fun to see someone accidentally become a zombie because of some crazy incident, and then starting the undead race, spreading fear across the lands while becoming the undead king. What a great tale. Of course, he could still just create a zombie king, or even a zombie god if he wanted. Accomplishing the same feat or worse. Oops, it would appear that I'm having dangerous thoughts. Eridel was naturally not foolish. Creating an undead king to terrorize his own world, is there anyone that evil? If so, Eridel would be sure to erase such a person if he or she ever came close. He was quite fond of his planet and would never let such a black star close. In a completely grey world devoid of life. In what looked like a palace with completely dark furnishings was an extremely black and gargantuan throne that was decorated with bones of all kinds. Sat on that throne was a 10,000-meter-tall skeleton covered in dark robes and adorned with a golden crown, golden flames rolling around in its eye sockets. Although horrifying, this skeleton radiated an aura of such majesty, that the true nature of this being was almost hidden. Almost, but not quite. The ghastly aura that was filled with such vicious killing intent and death itself proved all too hard to be hidden. A truly terrifying scene. What we didn't know was that if any immortal or god chanced upon this skeleton, they wouldn't think twice before using all their life-saving items to escape. The golden flames in its eyes suddenly flickered. Who schemes against this king? Eridel would also never let things go too far. If it seemed like world destruction was possible, he would reduce the threat and all related individuals to nothing. So the conclusion was that Eridel would leave most things to be regular. He would only change things that would help him with his goal in becoming a world that surpassed the laws. So if there was ever a mutative variant race of elf, it was by their ancestors' own doing. But while he said all this, he couldn't. I cannot resist. I must add at least one special person here, how can I not? My first enlightened species. It would be a sin to neglect them. Eridel was just joking around. He always planned to create a leader for this long-lived race. There was naturally a reason, and it would naturally be revealed in the most exemplar scenario. No need to even speak of it. I could just create them in some corner of a forest, but how could I not come bearing gifts? 16 comments 0 vote. World Tree. The area at the center of the eastern forest was the most resplendent scenery that you would ever see in your life. Tall and magnificent trees with luscious shimmering leaves that had different colors, some trees with silver leaves, some with blue, some were pink. Between some trees, long vines that seemed to be dripping with vitality were hanging with exotic fruits attached to them. All kinds of animals hung around. Monkeys picked fruits, birds chirped and deers pranced around. Even predators like tigers and wolves lazily sat around in harmony. The usually arrogant snakes that could be spotted were peacefully hanging around trees. At the center of all this was a lake. There didn't seem to be anything special about this lake, but it was very clean and very pure. There were even animals that drank and splashed around in it. There was no hostility at all. Only harmony and Mother Nature at its most beautiful. A truly glorious scene. But the peace was broken in a single moment. Crrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr twig was moving around underneath. Caw, caw, flew, reek. The animals didn't even hesitate, fleeing the place immediately as if they could sense something dangerous. It was quite comedic, seeing the dense amount of birds rising above the trees, escaping in every direction, not to mention the monkeys that pranced all over the place like it was their lives on the line. The more adept animals like tigers and snakes vanished like ghosts. And any moment now, all animals would be. A deer, or to be more precise an elk, had fallen, and from the looks of its repetitive failure to stand up again, it was crippled. Probably a result of the stampede. Well, whatever, it doesn't need to run anyway. Eridel turned his attention to more pressing things. The reason for this grand turn of events. At the center of the lake, a tree was growing, rapidly. And noisily. An ear-piercing sound like cracking wood resounded through the forest, alerting all residents, predator and prey alike. Even Jorma narrowed her eyes at the direction of the lake. Sploosh. The tree had finally broken the surface of the lake, causing a massive wave to rise. Looking at this peculiar tree, it seems that not only did it get taller at a stupendous rate, but it also got thicker as well. It was already 2 meters thick and still growing. But just a growing tree wouldn't be enough to set all those dumb animals running as if there was an apocalypse. It was actually the extremely dense amount of essence that arose with it. Although, if these animals were any smarter, they wouldn't be so foolish as to miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Be that as it may, there appeared to be one animal that would be witnessing the scene. A scene it would never forget for the rest of its life. The tree's growth didn't seem to stop, and neither did the rise in essence, which was a vibrant green in color and could actually be identified as the laws of life. A tree radiating the laws of life. Something that only occurs when a tree becomes a world tree was actually happening in a tree that was just born. To understand the gravity of the situation, you have to look at the evolutionary paths of a tree. In the beginning, a tree could either grow for 100 years without suffering any injuries or loss of vitality to become a spirit tree, or they could be lucky enough to absorb something that elevated them to the same status. Whatever the case, the first stage of evolution for a tree is the magic tree. This was a stage that enabled them to have their own mana. But it could only enhance the fruits, leaves and other such things that might have grown from the tree. Only 1 in 1,000 trees actually reached this status. After the magic tree came the spirit tree. At this stage, a tree starts to develop a consciousness, enabling the tree to actually do things of its own choice. But no matter how much it grew and how strong it got, it would always be a primitive soul. Trees had no emotions after all. Time, death, life, all of those things meant nothing to them. So they didn't care about anything and they didn't bother to cultivate even if they could. Apart from that, all functions of the tree were dramatically improved, they also greatly increased in size too. At this point, fruits born from them were great treasures that could cause kingdoms to fight over the rights to monopolize them. The spirit tree required 1,000 years of life to evolve, though, it was more lenient on the damage it could sustain. Of course, if the tree decided to cultivate or absorb other treasures, it could become a spirit tree much faster. After that came the fate tree. At this stage, anything could happen, hence its name. All functions evolve once more and fruits born from these trees become divine. No one dared to monopolize these trees unless they wanted to fight to the death with the rest of the continent. It wasn't rare for other continents to get involved. The benefits of a fate tree were just that great, capable of helping someone directly become an immortal. Of course, they would have to withstand the energy contained inside first. If a country were able to monopolize this tree, they would be able to produce immortals after immortals. A force that no one wanted to fight against. A fate tree usually took up to 50,000 years of life. After that came the extremely rare world tree. Something that barely happened, and even if it did, you would never see another in the same world. Effectively becoming a worthy figurehead of that world, hence its name. These trees were able to embody the laws of life, being capable of instilling the essence of life into its fruits, naturally making them many times greater. And despite the fact that these terrifying trees took a whopping 1 million years to grow, they were so powerful that people thought it was only right, and that was because they had the capability of helping someone surpass the immortal stage. Boom. And that's what it looks like this tree in front of us is becoming. Psych. While it was indeed becoming a world tree, at the same time, it would never bear anything edible. So there would be nothing to do here but admire the tree. Is what should have been the case. However, a reaction occurred. The water that this tree was born in began to change. 11 comments 0 vote. The first anomaly in existence. The lake began to shake violently, waves rising and falling all over the place. It looked quite terrifying. If anyone was superstitious, they would have thought some sea god was angry. But just when the waves were reaching a crescendo, they suddenly stopped. All waves falling back down and bringing peace back to the lake. It is time. Within 2 seconds the lake soon reached perfect stillness, even with the strange tree still ferociously growing. Quite the strange sight to say the least. But then something hundreds of times more shocking happened. The lake itself also began leaking copious amounts of the laws of life, the liquid water even changing color and becoming a very faint green. The lake had become a spring of life. A spring of life was a body of water that had fulfilled 2 steps to evolve. Step 1 was to make contact with a treasure with at least the life element. This gave the water the ability to slowly absorb it over time. But at most, it would only become water filled with dense essence. Half of the time it didn't even take on the element of life. Step 2 was to actually not absorb the essence of life from the treasure, but to enter a symbiotic relationship with it. The stronger the treasure grew, the stronger that spring of life became, and the stronger that spring of life became, the more nourishment it could provide the treasure. Normally, it was exceedingly difficult for a body of water and a treasure of life to enter a symbiotic relationship. It was simply because 95% of the time, neither of them had any sort of consciousness to speak of, so how could they be capable of asking for a partnership? Even in this situation, neither the lake or the abnormal tree had a consciousness. However, how can Eridel not know? Being a world whose most creative ability was the one to create contracts, would Eridel ever need to fret? Never. Being a prior genius human, he had boundless ideas rolling through his non-existent head. So naturally, he was able to find a way to help other beings create contracts without involving him. And that is exactly what is happening now. I must say, for a spring of life to enter a symbiotic relationship with my special tree, it must be the most talented spring of life in existence. Well, what could you expect from the great me? Ha 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 ha. What is that? Something universally wrong began to take place that even Eridel couldn't predict it. The lake began to change again. This time, it began accumulating the laws of water and the laws of creation, further changing the color of the water from the faint green it should have forever remained it into a very vibrant emerald green. But while extremely dizzying, it was not the end. Something else began to accumulate, something that made Eridel flabbergasted. It was a soul, a soouuull. Eridel's mighty voice boomed throughout the forest. Eridel couldn't believe what was occurring right in front of his eyes. That his creation had just developed a consciousness right in front of him without his input. While it wasn't impossible for a natural treasure to develop a consciousness, it was extremely rare, it would only ever be primitive, it wouldn't pick up a couple of laws like they were cabbages, and they certainly shouldn't be having the kind of infant thoughts that he could sense coming from the spring of life. And just as he was about to come back to his senses, he noticed that the lake's attention had snapped to a very lucky elk. The crippled one from earlier that seemed as dumbstruck as he was. I know, right, bro, we're watching something CRA. Boom. Laws of life, water and creation slammed into the elk like a blue, green and golden colored avalanche, endlessly and seamlessly soaking in like this damn mammal was a sponge. Naturally it began to evolve. It began to grow. Everything just seems to be growing here, becoming larger and larger as its evolution took place. Its fur also began to fall off like sand on a hill, as did its antlers. But new replacements took place soon after. Fur as white and bright as the stars began to grow out slowly. Antlers that looked like they were carved from ice, irrationally started to grow out of its skull with the raw essence of water swirling around them. Its eyes that were previously a mundane brown became a frigid sky blue that glowed domineeringly. Its hooves also broke apart like it was made from glass, causing the poor elk a greater amount of pain than what it was already enduring. Ooer, it groaned. Soon enough though, new hooves took place. Made from the same material as its antlers. And while its antlers had the same effects that the special dragon hatchlings had on their horns, portraying its perfect affinity with water, specifically the branched law of ice, its hooves took on a different effect. Releasing a small amount of ice mist that was extremely cold. Its body stopped growing at 6 meters tall, courtesy of the laws of life, which was to be expected. With the laws of life, how could it not gain a behemoth body, filled with endless vitality? Eridel could even see that the mind of the previously primitive elk was not left out of the evolution, stopping at a point where it was as smart as an ordinary human. He could also see that it had inherited memories from its obvious benefactor, the spring of life. Something that should be impossible, given the fact that the thing was literally minutes old. Boom! The laws of ice blasted out of the body of the now valiantly standing elk, signifying its advance into the first the second realm. Skipping the 9 magic beast stages entirely and becoming a stage 1 spiritual beast. Unbelievable, Eridel muttered. It had even used the essence of ice to form its mana. Feeling the boundless power rapidly rising in its body, the elk screamed his heart out. Oh. Having vented, it turned its gratitude-filled eyes to its incomprehensible patron. The spring of life. The lake was obviously paying attention. But it soon did something that shocked Eridel again. Good, it spoke in a delicate yet melodious voice. The fuck, Eridel, this mighty existence that performed miracle after miracle, wondered if he was dreaming. Even the ceaselessly rising tree that was at center of all this seemed to have paused. Nope, never mind, just my imagination, it's still growing, keep it up buddy. Swoosh, a large portion of the lake abruptly raised up before floating in the sky and rapidly condensing into the shape of a human. A very cute human that looked about 10 years old with twin tails. Although half transparent and green. If that wasn't enough to make Eridel stunned, the fact that it looked at his viewpoint and called out. Daddy, sure did. Eridel metaphorically blinked. The elk also blinked. From his inherited memories, he knew what a daddy was, but he wondered why his benefactor wasn't speaking to anyone in specific. He also wondered, why didn't he have a daddy? As he began to think, an extremely intimidating and cold voice nearly made him jump out of his skin. Who are you? Who else but Eridel could sound so mighty? But the little lake girl didn't seem to appreciate it. In fact, she began to tear up, which in itself was a surprising sight, taking into consideration that she was made of liquid herself. Sniff, sniff, Daddy doesn't like me. Wah! Eridel felt stumped, feeling a migraine coming for the first time in 2,000 years. Hey, relax, don't cry, okay? Eridel coaxed. Sniff, sniff, okay, the little girl sniveled. Can you explain to me why you have memories already? And why you are capable of creating a contract? Because that was certainly what happened between the lake and the elk. A contract was initiated by the lake and the elk agreed. Eridel was actually able to supernaturally read the wordless contract, and knew its contents. It went like this: in exchange for me giving you power, you will protect me for the rest of your life. As simple as that. Now they were both bound by the contract, or rather the elk was. The lake had already completed her side of the deal. The elk would never complete his. That's how powerful a contract could be. Sniff. I don't know, but when Daddy created me and helped me make a contract with Tree, I was born with this ability that only a world should have. Ah, I also have some of Daddy's memories, hee hee. Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. If Eridel still had legs, they would have given way by now. But, unfortunately, that was not the case anymore. What an anomaly, this is something that should never have happened, and yet. Ahem, okay, so why are you a girl then? Shouldn't you be a boy? Eridel couldn't comprehend why a soul packed with his own memories shouldn't be a carbon copy of him. Because Daddy likes girls. Quote. The world began shaking. Ah, Daddy, calm down, are you upset? Sniff. Do you not want me anymore? So embarrassing. Eridel was mortified, finding out that his daughter knew of his strong desire for women. Even taking the form of a girl just so that he would like her more. A stupid reason. As a father, how could he differentiate between a boy and girl if it was his child? The only difference would be him telling one how to get girls, and telling the other how to stay away from boys. HMPH. Eridel didn't realize that he was already thinking quite strangely. Daddy. Ah, sorry, I was just shocked, Eridel muttered. Does Daddy like me then? The little girl said with a trembling voice. Quote. Ah, yes, of course I do. How can I not love my own child? In fact, I should give you a name now. Yay, your name is now Eridel Domicus, Eridel said with majesty in his voice, a strange way to speak to his own daughter, but whatever works. Hee, I am Sira, but Daddy, I thought you don't like the Domicus family, Sira said, while tilting her head. Cute, cough, that isn't really true, the Ray, never mind, we'll talk another time, the tree of life is about to finish growing. Ah, okay, how troublesome, hopefully there'll be no more anomalies like this. Eridel decided to put the matter of Sira to the back of his mind. He couldn't for the life of him comprehend how these things happened, nor could he do anything about it unless he wanted to destroy her, which he didn't, so he would just ignore the matter altogether for now. Anyways, something like that shouldn't be happening again. If only he knew. 18 comments, 0 vote. All hail the Queen. The Tree of Life, Eridel's original gift to the elves. Eridel watched with impassive eyes as branches reached and began to sprout with glowing rainbow-colored leaves. It was truly a glorious sight, causing Sira and the elk to watch with shining eyes. The truth about elves was that the way elves and humans came into existence was not different at all. Microscopic organisms were made, and through various coincidences, they evolved into becoming true life forms. Depending on the result, it could take millions to even billions of years. Eridel watched as the tree started to release aurora lights, the laws of the getting denser and livelier. Sira also began to glow a little brighter. Most of the time, whatever enlightened species appeared first in the world was the only one that would ever appear. Meaning, you would rarely find worlds that contained something like humans, elves and demons at the same time, unless it was a conquered world that was being occupied by foreigners, keeping the original enlightened race as slaves or forced coexistence. There were 2 reasons for this. 1. Creating an enlightened race was too hard, so if they already had one, a world would rarely choose to create another. 2. In the rare cases that gods worked together to create another race, wars that would only ever escalate to the point of self-destruction would occur. Why? Let me give you an example. The gods are humans and maybe a few beasts that were lucky enough to become gods. For some reason, they decided to create angels. 1 million years later, those angels are on equal or greater levels with the humans now. So, why should they be beneath the humans? Why should there only be human gods and no angel gods? Resentment is born, and sure, that's all it is. But it only takes one impulsive person for everything to go to shit, and war is here. And the gods can barely do a thing about it. If they even attempted, the god contract would destroy them first. So war will continue. And it will not end. This creates a weakness. And weakness is unforgivable in the laws of this dog-eat-dog universe. It doesn't take much to guess what happens next. The only way for multiple enlightened races to coexist like rabbits and squirrels, was for them to be there from the beginning. The God Council will be filled with each of their races and everyone gets the same start and privileges. There wouldn't be a case of one race filled with boundless superiority, and the other filled with boundless jealousy. Alas, such a thing was never done before. Ha ha ha, indeed it's never been done before, but who am I? Eridel's heart was filled with arrogance as he watched the final transformation of his tree of life. Melodious songs began to play in congratulations. Syrah clapped her hands and squealed while the elk did its best. Dark green plant pods began to grow out of the tree, only being connected by stems that looked suspiciously like umbilical cords. Each of these pods were about 40 to 50 centimeters long and 30 centimeters wide. However, there was one that was over 2 meters tall. This one actually brimming with the laws of life and wood. Eridel was amused, thinking of what those pompous immortals and gods that thought that they knew it all would think if they were to watch all the spectacles that were happening on just this one day. When the two essences contained inside the bigger pod reached a crescendo, they burst out. But one was significantly more than the other. The telltale signs that someone had a breakthrough. Clearly, something inside of the pod had cultivated mana, but against expectations, it was formed from the laws of wood. In the next moment, the pod detached from the tree and fell into the spring of life with a splash. A few seconds later, buoyancy caused it to float back to the top of the lake despite its obvious weight. A little party trick that all springs of life have. The three spectators watched with various emotions ranging from expectation to curiosity. Shick! All of a sudden there was a tearing sound. A delicate and slender hand had pierced through the pod with surprising ease, followed by another. They gripped both edges of the gaping cut and abruptly yanked them aside, revealing the most bewitching face Eridel had ever seen. A woman crawled out of the pod, instincts preventing her from making a fool of herself when she emerged into the water. After a brief look of surprise on her face, her eyes connected with the two visible figures that she could see not too far from her. Seeming to understand something, she made her way towards them without fear. It was awkward at first. She naturally didn't know how to swim 10 seconds after birth, so she wiggled around for a few minutes but eventually managed to waddle towards the shore. A most glorious sight for a certain invisible voyeur. When she reached the shore, it was another mission of figuring how to stand. Something she was trying to copy from the strange smaller girl in front of her. A process that burned another minute. But she eventually did it, and what an enchanting sight it was. The woman stood at 5 feet 10 tall. A tall height for a female, but it suited her perfectly. A soft and seductively curvaceous figure that caused her huge breasts and majority of her lower body to jiggle with each step. The iconic delicate but pointed-looking long ears of the elves were naturally not missing. Adding to her charm. Her succulent skin wasn't unlike jade, even sharing the same green color, a clear result of her royal blood. Her plump lips, both of them, and nipples were of a darker shade, attracting the gazes of both genders and inadvertently rising lust in the hearts of others. A truly divine body, but her most striking features were her hair and eyes. Her long hair was a pure unblemished white that supernaturally glowed, falling down to her calves. Her thin eyebrows and long eyelashes of the same white. But her eyes were actually completely white with no irises or anything else. On top of that, they shone like stars. And yet, this didn't make her look weird at all. The splendor of those features instantly regulated the abundant sex appeal that the woman had, making her look more noble, elegant and divine even without clothes. It actually made her already sublime beauty burst out of mortal comprehension. This was the queen of the elves. All hail the queen. 12 comments 0 vote. Invincible trio. Eridel watched as the queen looked all around the environment with the curiosity of a newborn, which in essence, she was. After a while, she focused her attention on Syrah, the only thing that looked like her. And while it would sound nice to say that she cutely tilted her head to the side, it was not possible. She didn't even know she was confused, so how could she know about facial expressions and body language? So it was more like she stared blankly, yet somehow imposingly, waiting for something to happen. Ah, she's looking at me. Hello, squealed Syrah as she waved her hand high. She isn't knowledgeable enough to speak yet, idiot. You should offer her a contract. Eridel's heart-palpitating voice spoke. shocking the queen, causing her to look all around for the source of the unknown thing. Surprisingly enough, or maybe not so surprising, was the fact that she didn't look afraid at all, unlike the other animals. Eridel was now capable of focusing his voice in certain locations, not causing global panic each time, but it was still loud and intimidating. It could be the fact that she was queen that stopped her from cowering, or she didn't have the innate instinct of an animal that screamed, "Run from power." Or both. "I'm not an idiot. What should the contract terms be?" Sira exclaimed, before turning to his general direction. Funnily enough, the queen followed her example and looked straight at his viewpoint with those fantastical eyes of hers. How exquisite! Eridel silently marveled at her beauty before focusing on the question. Somewhat the same. You will give her knowledge and you will also make sure to help advance her race. And in turn, her entire race must protect you! Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Crazy. Eridel was actually enforcing an entire race to protect Sira. Wasn't this too overprotective? HMPH. The elves should consider themselves privileged to protect my to protect Sira. Who does this guy think he's fooling? Okay. Either Sira didn't care or she was dumb. After closing her eyes for a few seconds, she opened them again with a satisfied expression on her face. At the same time, the queen suddenly blinked. The only sign of confusion she could show. She then stared straight at Sira as if she could tell that it was Sira that was the cause of her confusion. The two stared at each other for what seemed like a minute before the queen responded. Her eyes suddenly lit up, leaking the translucent and overflowing soul energy that suddenly started emerging inside of her. As her soul age forcefully grew, many images and comprehensions invaded her head. Life and death, race, power, language, kingdoms and empires, king and queens, the tree of life, the heavens. More and more knowledge infiltrated her mind, causing her to change rapidly. This consisted for 10 whole minutes, before her eyes returned to normal. But nowhere near as deadpan as before. If before, she looked like a very sexy robot. Now, she looked like a very sexy queen. The previously lacking majesty was now leaking in abundance. The way she stood with her arms crossed together in front of her chest, the way her chin was slightly raised and the way her eyes narrowed. All these things portrayed the bearing of someone above the masses. The queen gracefully turned her head to look back at the tree of life. A look of doting briefly showed on her face before she solemnly focused her eyes on the avatar of Spring of Life. Her race's second lifeline. Without hesitation, she dropped to one knee. This queen greets the heavens and the heavenly daughter, the queen spoke for the first time. Her voice was like that of the celestials, absolutely mellifluous and enchanting, yet filled with majesty. However, Eridel was quite confused, for about a quarter of a second. Which is quite something, considering his powerful mind. His speculations were confirmed when he heard an annoying, hey. Sira placed her hand on the side of her somehow blushing face. No need for that, Daddy Heavens can get quite embarrassed. Single quote. Single quote. Sira, Eridel's ancient voice filled with indignation sounded out. This time it actually affected reality, shaking the trees and blowing strong winds. Even the tree of life creaked, causing the queen's previously odd face to pale and twist with trepidation. My lord, please calm your ire. Eek, Sira yelped before diving back into her lake, abandoning the shivering elk that had lost the strength in its legs. Being in the same position it was in before its transformation. Ha! Eridel forcefully pushed down his rumbling emotions and sighed, bringing peace back to the mystical environment. Eridel focused his full attention on the queen, unconsciously increasing the pressure on her. It was time to wrap things up. The reason he was mad was because he didn't want to disclose his identity to anyone yet, even worse, a false one like the heavens. This could cause all sorts of confusion later on, especially if she started spreading that knowledge to the rest of her race. How annoying. Queen of the Elves, I hope that you do not speak of my identity to any other being. Eridel said coldly. The queen shivered, nodding her head like a chicken and causing her massive mountains to start shaking. Is there anything you would like to say? Eridel asked. I would like to thank the Lord for his generous gifts. The queen stuttered, losing all of her royal bearing. It would seem that you understand the plentiful privileges you have been born with. As mentioned before, all enlightened beings were born like any other, born through microscopic organisms that had gone through countless evolutions and mutations. So why was it that they were now being born from the tree of life like they were fruits? It was because that was Eridel's gift. An elf born from the tree of life would only fall off the tree and finally start his life when he reached adulthood. Essentially 18 years old, but on the tree, that was shortened to a month-long process. During that entire time, the elf would be continuously nourished by the tree of life, developing a very high innate talent. They would also form a supernatural connection with the tree of life that came with many benefits. Through that connection, the elves could do many things. They could telepathically contact other elves, they could temporarily draw energy from the tree, they could even use the connection to sense the laws of life and by association the laws of water. A great boon to any faction. There were other benefits but they were best left unmentioned for now. Yes, my lord, order this queen and I will make sure to accomplish your tasks to the best of my ability. The queen said almost fervently with a gradually expanding smile on her face, forgetting her fear and failing to hide her excitement. It couldn't be helped, even with all her knowledge, she still lacked experience. At this moment, Sira poked her head out of the water again but Eridel ignored her. He also chose to ignore the elf's useless pledge of fealty. I name you Titania, surnamed Sylvain. It is the Sylvain name that you pass on to your descendants just as you pass on your blood, but I'm sure you know that. Eridel drawled. Yes, my lord, Titania was ecstatic, I was named by the heavens itself. That's right, Eridel planned on the queen finding a spouse amongst the elves and bearing children. Could it even be considered a royal bloodline if there was no royal family? Just like the queen, her descendants will have the same green skin, white hair and white eyes. This was a result of the royal bloodline. A bloodline that was directly aligned with the laws of wood. Other elves were born with white or black skin, blonde, brown or black hair, blue, green, brown or black eyes. Pretty much just like humans. Any other colors will be a result of extreme affinity or bloodline. Hi Titania, Sira seemed to have forgotten her fear as well, jumping up and landing in front of the queen. TCH, Eridel was still quite peeved with Sira, deciding to leave. But before he left, he turned his attention to the elk that looked like an abandoned puppy. You, fortunate elk that has been chosen by fate. Eridel wondered if it really had been chosen by fate. Too many coincidences were involved and funnily enough, it was the strongest being alive, if you didn't count an anomaly like Sira. I ordain you as the guardian of the eastern forest and I name you. Wait, Sira interrupted him, I want to name him. She turned to the elk without waiting for an answer. Your name is Dodo. Eridel felt like spitting blood. I'm sorry, young elk. Eridel could have sworn he could see a tear falling out of its eye. This is to both of you. Guardian of the eastern forest and queen of the elves. In whatever you do, be wise, be strong and be courageous. Eridel's presence vanished from the scene, completely overlooking the potential of 3 future powerhouses concentrated in one spot. With the snake family not too far from them and more hidden talents biding their time. The eastern forest was surely bound to be chaotic. How wonderful. 16 comments 0 vote. Awakening magical energy. It had been a week and Eridel had accomplished many things. First, he had finally created the human race. In each continent, you would find 40,000 humans, each split into groups of 4 and placed in the 4 directions, north, east, south and west. Naturally, a lot of them had already died. Humans were a race that relied on knowledge when they had no strength. But what knowledge could they have with a 6 to 7 day long history? It was especially perilous for the humans in the east of the central continent, after all, that's where all the big shots were. The eastern forest. In fact, of the 10,000 humans there, only 6,000 were left. It was mostly the doing of the Snake clan, the domineering hooligans of the east. Wherever they rolled, everyone else fled. When they said yes, no one else dared say no. Whenever they occupied territory, no one resisted. The Snake clan was unrivaled under the heavens. Or so they thought. When they arrived at the center of the forest, seeing the bountiful resources, they didn't think twice before trying to occupy the place. They didn't yet understand the concept of resources, but they did understand that consuming things filled with energy would increase their strength. So seeing so many treasures filled with energy, they didn't hesitate at all. Would the owners even fight back? But their thoughts were shattered when they felt the behemoth-like pressure that suddenly arose from behind them. And before they could even turn around to confront the issue, crash, blood spattered and bone pieces flew out. Some even severely injured other snakes. Looking back, they could actually see that one of their brothers had actually had his skull stomped into paste. But what was even more terrifying was the gigantic elk that stood imposingly above their slain brood member. Draco and Lily didn't even think twice before fleeing. Jorma wasn't actually there. After an accidental cave-in that occurred in one of her adventures, she usually sent one of her fellow snakes to a location she wanted to enter, if she hadn't already been there before. What happened next terrified the rest of the snakes to the point of severe PTSD. A ghastly scene they will never forget for the rest of their life. Half of them were massacred. Ever since then they didn't dare tread to the center of the forest, and when they saw any other elk, even a baby one, they vanished at top speed. In fact, Dodo could have killed the entire race. But he was the guardian of the forest, not the executor. He only killed them to that extent because of their unscrupulous ways. Now they would think twice before arrogantly invading everywhere. Now back on the situation of the humans. It was much better in the west. The dragons were still all sleeping, and other animals weren't all that fierce. So they managed. If you could call moping around like zombies, managing. It couldn't be helped. They had no purpose, and they had no hunting skills. They could only take notes from herbivores and eat plants to survive. Humanity was the lowest of the low. But Eridel didn't care in the slightest. All enlightened species went through this phase. The process of struggling to survive will ultimately help their descendants. Their descendants will learn from the past failures of their race and rise above their predecessors. Eridel had much more exciting things to worry about. 2 main projects. One would be pretty quick, the other would take a very long time. By mortal standards anyway. The first thing he was going to do was to finally awaken magic energy in the planet. He was quite excited about this because he would be the first world to awaken magic energy so early. There was a chance that this was a requirement for his goal in becoming a world that surpassed the laws. A roughly 10,000-year-old world is awakening magic energy. Completely unprecedented. But this world is ME, so what else could be expected? Eridel's hubris knew no boundaries. Alright, here goes nothing. Eridel focused his attention on his core. It looked like a spherical gray-colored pearl that had the diameter of 10 meters. It was very smooth and had a prominent sheen on the surface. But that was it. It was quite bland. Eridel ignored the docile-looking ball of destruction essence that sat trapped beside his core and peered into the inner workings of his core. And what he discovered made him pause. He discovered nothing. Well, nothing that could help him activate magical energy. How annoying. 2 hours later he still couldn't accomplish anything. Could it be that I have to wait like everyone else? Awakening magical energy was like going through puberty. A process that could not be controlled. A process that started whenever it wanted to. A process that could also never be reversed. When you started growing hair on your chin, no matter how much you shaved, it would always come back. With magical energy, when it appeared, it would only keep growing. But of course, there were horrifying situations that did the opposite. But that's for another time. Will I have to sit and wait? Again? Never, I refuse. Driven to near madness by the possibility of stagnation, Eridel decided to do something drastic. He actually summoned forth his primordial essence of his soul and actually shoved it into his core. Madness. Does he court death? A golden light began to emerge from the center of his core like a lone star surrounded by the vast cosmos. The golden light grew bigger, but it was at a snail's pace. Eridel watched with trepidation as he continued to flood his core with more and more of his essence. Sink. A hair-raising sound was heard that sounded suspiciously like broken glass. Looking at the small but visible crack on the side of his core, Eridel was filled with fear for the first time in centuries. His core was damaged. Consequently, the laws of destruction slowly began to form, just like before when this planet was nearly destroyed the first time. This would spell the end of most worlds, but Eridel was here. So how could it accomplish anything when it failed the first time? He unhesitatingly vanquished the essence that didn't even have time to form yet. He didn't even have the attention to think of containing it in his already trapped ball of destruction essence. He was just too nervous and he didn't dare to be distracted. With haste, he quickly healed the crack. He contemplated stopping the entire process, but his irrational hate of stagnation took control of his actions again, so he persevered. 10 days passed and half of his core was filled with the golden light, but in no way was it an easy process. His core would frequently fracture and each time would be bigger than the last. Naturally, the laws of destruction that erupted were denser as well, but they still vanished before any harm was done. If Eridel could sweat, he would be drenched by now. Not from exertion, but from the nerve-wracking process that was happening before his eyes. Thinking of the chance of possible self-destruction, Eridel started to become dangerously furious. Why should I be destroyed just because I want to become greater? Is this what it means for man to propose and God to dispose? Why should I have to yield? Why? CIIIINK. CKK. CKK. Half of Eridel's core splintered. 11 comments 0 vote. Doomsday. Eridel's heart jumped, his random burst of anger vanishing in an instant. He was able to expend a greater amount of energy to heal the core and erase the laws of destruction, but things were becoming a lot more dangerous and he was starting to feel sick. The kind of sick you feel when a feeling of heavy regret dawns upon you. The kind of sick that made you wish you had a time machine. Eridel was feeling that right now. But he was already here, and at this point, he could not turn back. It was only with his primordial essence that his core was remaining slightly stable. If he took out his primordial essence, everything would collapse. That was like forcefully removing super glue that was keeping a construct together. Foolish. Another 20 days passed. At this point, his core was 90% filled with his essence, however. He was already unable to withstand the pain that occurred every crack. He had noticed it since the beginning. But if before, it was like a fly slamming into him. Now it was like being run down by a truck. Each rack of pain wiped away all of his thoughts and nearly made him lose control. An extremely critical situation. If Eridel hadn't tempered his mind in those 2,000 years of solitude, he would have been finished by now. Looking at the barely stable core that looked like it was vibrating, Eridel wondered if this was the end. Surprisingly, in that moment, his calmness was restored and his control over his core increased a notch. Either I die here, or I succeed and do something no one else in existence has ever been able to do. He realized that that was all there was to it. Being a 2,000-year-old soul. Deep down, Eridel wasn't really afraid of death. In fact, there were many times that he craved it. His current fear was only the instinctual fear that any body had when facing fatality. Whether it was a human, beast, item, spirit, or an entire world. They all instinctually cowered from death. An instinct that ensured the continuation and function of the body. But Eridel himself, he didn't fear death in the slightest. He had already been through it once. A strangely freeing thought. It was akin to being scared of confronting a lion, then realizing you had already defeated a lion of the same caliber in the past and came out unscathed. Wasn't it now ludicrous to still be afraid? Ha 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 ha, how silly of me. Without hesitation, Eridel shoved the rest of the needed primordial essence into his core. CSHHHHH. Eridel's core was instantly smashed apart. Horrifyingly dense amounts of destruction essence exploded out. When a core was destroyed, leaving nothing left, there was no need to wait for death to come. It was already here. The trapped ball of destruction essence that was previously docile seemed to be invigorated and also burst out of its cage with vengeful wrath. At this point, Eridel's consciousness was already fading. It seems that this is the end. Millions of thoughts passed through his mind, most of them about the residents of his planet that would soon be dead as well. A thought that brought him a tinge of sorrow. But nothing could be done. With the image of his accidental daughter in his mind faded to black. The laws of destruction seemed to be especially excited. It was as if their slave master had died and now they were free. With great vigor, they swept the many corners of the world, reaping lives as they went. It was an apocalyptic scene. Titania was terrified. Syrah was petrified. Dodo collapsed from fear. Even the snake clan hegemons were slithering around hysterically. The dragon family was still asleep. As a matter of fact, Kalmilla and Eshma seemed to be getting stronger. The laws of destruction being unconsciously absorbed by them. Gaia was also completely unaffected. But the humans and other beasts were running around like headless chicken, the weaker ones directly collapsing, breathing their last breaths. Seas raged, lands cracked and volcanoes erupted. Just like the time before Eridel took over this world. It was a heartbreaking event. It seemed that the fate of this world was to end here and now. But all of a sudden, in the deepest regions of the planet, where the shattered remains of Eridel's core lay, something changed. For some reason, the golden light that used to be contained within the fragmented core pieces seemed to be fusing with them. The lights dimmed, but as they dimmed, the gray-colored core pieces started to change color. They became gold. Boom! When the last piece of the core became golden, they all started to shine even more blindingly than before. A heavy and indomitable aura that was also gold in color burst out of the fragmented core pieces like an avalanche. Shockingly, the fragmented core pieces began to float and gather together. Each piece seemed to know what place to go, and they fused with each other like a jigsaw puzzle. And every time they fused, the aura they emitted doubled. This was a scene that could make anyone who watched petrified. In fact, at this moment, the laws of destruction that was arrogantly rampaging all over the place seemed to pause as if they sensed something wrong. All of a sudden, they fled. Yes, the laws of destruction actually began to escape into the atmosphere like sheep running from a wolf. But how can I let you go so easily? An ancient yet sonorous voice that sounded extremely pleasant to hear was heard across the entire world. It even caused the already ravaged lands to quake and fracture. But this wasn't that the dead Eridel's voice. But why did he sound so, cough? His voice seemed to have improved. 100,000 meters long golden hands were formed in space, surrounding the entire world. Without a single pause, they grasped at every essence of destruction before fusing together to form a strangely familiar cage. This cage rapidly condensed until it looked like a golden glass ball, and inside was the condensed laws of destruction. The exact same thing that happened 3 months ago. But this time, the caged essences of destruction were hundreds of times denser. The caged destruction laws floated down to the planet, even sinking through the ground that seemed to strangely open up for them in expectation. It kept going down until it stopped. Looking at where it stopped, wasn't this where the last caged destruction's laws were kept? So that means, exclamation mark. Where the previous world core was shattered, a new core that was 3x bigger, completely golden and majestically luminous, was floating in its location. Was this the new world core? I seem to have broken through. Excellent. But first, boom, a new essence that was never before present on this planet actually began to erupt from the core. The very essence that Eridel risked his life to obtain. It was magical energy. Exclamation mark. 17 comments 0 vote. Download the app for greater interaction. You can chat with me about my writing experience apart from the comments section. SolitaryMonarch. Download app now. Worldwide evolution. When Eridel had woken up again, he was shocked. Not because of the fact that he was able to maintain his soul after death. He had already cheated death once, what's one more? But when he was able to see his planet and even feel the connection between body and soul, he knew he had somehow survived. Despite this joyous revelation, he didn't dare to waste time thinking. He could see that his world was still being ravaged. Although the amount of deaths weren't that high because the life forms weren't the focus of the laws of destruction just yet, it still caused him to be uncontrollably livid. Subconsciously, Eridel had already developed a PTSD of being left alone. This was a result of his 2,000-year-long afterlife. And it was because of this trauma that it was so easy for him to subconsciously accept Sira as his child. Humans were social creatures. Without social interaction, a human's mind will eventually deteriorate. Even a child brought up in the wild will have animals to fill their undetectable desire for social interaction. Pretending that the predatory animals were villains and the docile herbivores were his people. If there was ever a child that was born in a place surrounded by countless edible plant life, but not other life forms, no matter where you looked, the child would die from solitude, even if the child was able to eat all it could eat. It was that terrifying. You could probably think of some people that could go into solitude for many years with no problem. But you have to understand that they subconsciously knew, if they stepped out of the room, there would be people to be seen. But for someone like Eridel, who didn't know how many thousands or millions of years he would have to go without being able to interact with another person, how could he stay normal? It was only because of Eridel's continuous soul upgrades that he maintained sanity. So when he saw the residents of his planet dying one by one, he was filled with a literal world-shaking anger. He immediately locked onto every essence of destruction and once more placed it beside his core. The laws of destruction weren't so easy to obtain like the laws of creation. Creation was everywhere, and although it was just as hard to grasp, for a world like Eridel, as long as it was there, he could grasp it. But destruction laws only came with heavy amounts of destruction. Would Eridel be so dumb as to lay waste to things in his planet just to obtain the resulting laws? Nay. Anyhow, he has those laws now, there would be no need to be excessive. I seem to have broken through. Excellent. But first, Eridel noticed the changes in his soul. It was roughly 120 years since the last upgrade, so it was quite satisfying to experience it once more. If other geniuses had heard that Eridel considered a soul upgrade at this level merely satisfying, they would almost spit enough blood to die. It was just too abnormal. But Eridel didn't know that, and even if he did, he wouldn't care. Would he be so shameless as to compete with residents? What a joke. What was more exhilarating was what was occurring within his core. He could finally feel something. Something had changed, and on an instinctive level, he could tell that this was what he wanted, this is what he risked his life for. When he began to prod that feeling, he felt the strange sensation of a nose on the verge of a sneeze. As he continued, the feeling became more prominent and uncomfortable. But all of a sudden, click, he heard a peculiar click type of sound that reverberated in his mind. Accompanying that weird sound was a flush of information containing the secrets of magical energy. Boom! Like the eruption of a grand volcano, magical energy exploded out of his core in great amounts and spread out to invade his planet. Its behavior was just like the laws of destruction, but it was a lot more tyrannical, not discriminating against the residents at all and invading them too. But this result caused Eridel to mentally grin. As he watched, grand changes began to take place all over the world. When the magical energy infiltrated all of the lands of his planet, he noticed that they were rapidly healing. Cracks and fissures closed, overflowing lava was eradicated, the raging seas were quelled, and even the dying nature was restored, thrumming with vitality. Some of the herbs around the planet even evolved into becoming magical herbs. A type of herb that was beneficial when eaten, but more useful when refined into a pill. Surprisingly, there were actually some magical trees that appeared, stepping into the first stage of tree cultivation. Something that shouldn't have taken up to 100 years was happening after 5 months. More and more benefits like this were sprouting out like mushrooms after the rain all over the world. And that was not all. All the life forms on the planet began to evolve. For the beasts, as they were all primordial life forms, the first of their species. Their first evolution was dependent on their will, location, adaptations, affinities and more. Meaning, anything can happen. Well, you wouldn't see a mouse becoming a canine or a sheep becoming a feline, but within their own possibilities, anything was possible. This would never happen to their descendants unless a mutation occurred. With each evolution a descendant has, they would take the same path as their ancestor. For example, snow wolf greater than ice wolf greater than glacial wolf greater than heavenly blizzard wolf. There would be no deviation. Whether you surpassed your ancestor and became a star-swallowing icicle wolf, or not, would not change the fact that you would forever remain a one-headed ice affinity wolf. All sorts of strange evolutions started occurring in the beast species, and not one of them were weak. Eridel noted down the ones with the more outstanding evolutions. What amused him was that there was another special talent within the snake clan. It was a snake with resplendent purple scales, cold purple eyes and ominous-looking fangs that dripped with a terrifying purple-colored poison that actually caused the ground to dissolve. Oh, and the snake also had 2 heads. Eridel actually remembered this guy. Some time ago, when this little guy was domineeringly slithering through the forest. He encountered a strange plant that contained some kind of essence. The plant was one that had 1 stem but 2 violet flower head, a rather average-looking flower to be honest, but even so, for some reason, the snake could feel a sense of danger from it. 8 comments 0 vote. Legendary chicken. The plant was one that had 1 stem but 2 violet flower head, a rather average-looking flower to be honest, but even so, for some reason, the snake could feel a sense of danger from it. Despite that, the snake still decided to eat it. Even if this thing could fight, could it outmatch his speed? HMPH. He had eaten loads of things filled with energy that made him stronger and bigger, so although this thing seemed different, it should be the same. With a cold glint of anticipation in his eyes, he opened wide and swiftly devoured the flower in one gulp. With arrogance filling his heart, he thought something along the lines of, "This thing no fight, no run, weak." The snake had actually thought the thing would fight back since it had felt a sense of danger, but there was no resistance at all. Maybe scared, ha ha ha. That was the last thought he had before he started to rapidly lose vitality, shocking him greatly. It writhed and hissed, but nothing stopped the horrendous pains that racked its body, and soon he passed out. Eridel managed to notice him because he was in the process of creating poisonous plants and herbs, but who knew that literally minutes after he was done, there would already be a tester. As his first tester, Eridel decided to be generous and save the snake's life, causing it to wake up immediately but run back to the main territory in fear. Unfortunately for the following testers, Eridel ignored them. Poisons were meant to kill, and if he saved all of the victims, then what was the point of creating it in the first place? Soon, they would all develop instincts to stay away from poison anyway. Now Eridel was seeing the snake develop the same properties of the poisonous flower. It must have thought that it was the strongest thing in existence for it to influence its psyche like that. 2 heads, purple poison, I'm sorry, young one. But it seemed that because of this encounter, the snake might evolve into becoming a hydra. Speaking of snakes, Draco had a small race evolution too. Lily and Jorma didn't have one because from birth, they already had their bloodline. They could now only improve it. The two of them only got bigger and more impactive auras. Jorma got more of the former and Lily got more of the latter. However, Draco didn't have a bloodline, he just had a perfect affinity with the laws of fire. So he was more than welcome to get one now. But the result? Draco, he actually developed a pair of antlers on his forehead. If that did not expose not only the fear, but the hidden reverence that he had for the elk, Eridel didn't know what else did. All the other snakes were just terrified of Dodo, they didn't dare to have thoughts of being like him. Thinking about it, it wasn't too surprising. Draco seemed to have a prideful personality that hoped to be the most dazzling and powerful. So it was not a big surprise that the most amazing thing that he ever saw, Dodo, influenced his evolution. Besides that, there was another evolution that got Eridel excited. It was actually a phoenix. It was a result of awe-inspiring coincidences that even stunned Eridel. One that cemented his decision to let things progress naturally unless otherwise needed. There was an alpha chicken. A nice, plump, grain-eating chicken. The chicken was cool, he had subordinates that ran around doing errands for him, and he had all the females he could ever want. Life was bliss and everyone wanted to be like him. But one day, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked off. Everything changed when the laws of destruction erupted. Being a weak race, most of his flock had died very swiftly. As an alpha, he was more resilient and strong, but he was dying too. However, he was smart. When he was thinking of how to survive, the memory of a miraculous lake that he used to live close to surfaced in his mind. It wasn't so great when he was living there. Amazing water, but that was it. But when massive changes occurred in that area, he fled with his flock. Finding out how trash other sources of water were in comparison, he decided to return 1 month later. When he and his flock returned to the lake, they were flabbergasted. Essence, so much essence. But before he could even get excited, a massive hoof blocked his vision. He remembered how he had stumbled back and even fell on his bum, resulting in him seeing the owner of that hoof. He still shivered even now just thinking about it. But that wasn't the point. The water. If he could absorb some of the essence in that water, he and his flock could survive. With haste, he made his way as fast as possible with his remaining 5 flock members at his tail. 10 minutes later he rushed into the clearing, the lake in vision, but 2 more of his brothers had died, causing him grief. The only ones left were the 2 strong women that he doted on the most, hoping to make strong children with, essentially his wives and his last brother. When he saw the lake he was ecstatic, he could instinctively tell that if he got into the lake he and his flock would survive. Although he could see the behemoth-like elk and some other green-colored animal resting in the water, that only confirmed his suspicions. Filled with happiness he urged his flock to run the last distance, which was roughly 30 meters. He couldn't care less about the elk, if he stayed away, he would die anyway. At least, if he got in that lake, he could have a chance of survival. But when they were 20 meters away, lightning struck. Nothing quite special, lightning had been striking everywhere ever since this whole thing began, so he was used to it by now. But the problem was where the lightning struck. A tree that was in front of them was blasted and it was immediately lit on fire and started to fall. That in itself wasn't much of a problem, even if they couldn't fly, they were still birds, they were quite fast when they wanted to be. However, his brother, who was blinded by desperation and even dared to run in front of him, didn't notice. 7 comments 0 vote. Birth of the Phoenix. The Alpha was smart and could tell what was going to happen. If things kept going as it was, his brother would be killed by the falling tree even before it burned him. At first, he was almost satisfied. How dare you run in front of me, just go die, is what he was thinking. He had purposefully lowered his speed so that he could make sure no one was left behind. But it seemed that his brother didn't hold the same sentiment. But when he thought of all those that had died, his anger fizzled out. Then it came back again with more fury. How can I let my last brother die in front of me? Am I such a trashy king? Is what could be interpreted from his primitive thoughts. He pushed his speed to the max and rushed to his last brother, who still didn't notice even him, irking him a little. At full speed, he bulldozed into him, sending him flying out of the path of the falling tree. Hee, this king is great, let's see how you will still dare to ignore me. He was filled with pride at his great strength. Although he wasn't a magic beast yet, most of the treasures filled with essence were eaten by him alone. He only shared with his close brothers and wives. But he didn't need to care about such things because he himself was now in a dangerous dilemma. The tree was definitely going to crush him. But he could at least minimize the damage. With all of his effort, he ran forwards, trying to exit the paw. Boom. Indeed, it made a booming sound. All the trees in this place were ridiculously large after all. They were much bigger than the time when he was first living here. The Alpha felt his ribs crack and one of his legs snap. Even though he dodged the main danger, which was the trunk. A rather thick branch still struck him almost flat. Any other chicken would have died, but he was the strong Alpha. Even though his feathers were already catching fire and pain pierced him all over, he wanted to survive. So with all his efforts he struggled and struggled. By the time he had wiggled his way out of the tree, he was half-scorched black, one of his eyes even hung out, creating a gruesome image. With his remaining flock watching him with fear in their eyes, he trudged to the lake step by step. They were already there, waiting for him, he told himself. He was only 7 meters away. As he struggled with all his might, he burned and burned. But still, he didn't stop. I'm going to be the greatest king. I will have the most grains, the most subordinates and the most wives. Is what could be interpreted from his thoughts. It could be said that he was half-lucid and somewhat delusional. He was running on fumes, so he tried to encourage himself to move just a few steps more. Even the elk and the strange green animal were watching him with awe in their eyes. With great ambitions filling his soul, he trudged forward. He was only 3 meters away now, just a few. The world tilted, but it would be more accurate to say that the Alpha had fallen. The Alpha couldn't believe what he was looking at. His leg that wasn't broken had actually been burned halfway off, signifying his death. He was absolutely devastated. He was so close. Just a few more steps and he would have survived. He had seen how his flock had been healed in those waters. The Alpha didn't notice the excited glint in his brother's eyes. He was only looking at his 2 wives that looked at him with grief. He wanted them to be the last things he saw before he died. But just as he was about to close his eyes and wait for the rapidly approaching death, something happened. A strange essence that the Alpha had never felt before arose in his body. He didn't notice that this was happening all over the world. As this energy filled him, he could feel his muscles becoming stronger, and his wounds becoming lighter. Ekurrrr. An ugly chicken croak sounded out. This must be help from the heavens. Utilizing the full extent of his remaining energy, he ran a few steps before diving into the lake. Splash! As he sunk deeper and deeper into the lake, the light from the surface gradually faded, silence overwhelming everything. He found himself in a rare moment of peace. As the pain in his body dissipated, 2 different kinds of energies continued to fill him. Magical energy and the laws of life. His body enlarged, his strength soared and his bones toughened. He could tell that he was going through a grand change. But in all this time, the one thing that never left his mind was the image of fire. That domineering and unblockable power that almost cost him his life. He wanted that power. Feeling destiny call him to the surface, he lunged. Boom! As he burst out of the water, with the night sky and moon in the air. As he flapped his now enlarged wings, he let out a domineering phoenix cry. Sheer, a new unfamiliar yet familiar essence started to fill his body. These were the elements of fire. As he noticed the flames all over his newly red-colored feathers, he let out another cry of happiness. He could tell that these flames were his power from memory inheritance that each beast gains when they evolve. For now, all it did was explain their powers. Later on, beasts would be able to pass down memories in their blood and their descendants would obtain them when they evolved. When he was about to come down from his high, a light abruptly shot down from the heavens, enveloping his entire body. This caused grand changes to occur in his body. First, the elements of fire in his body had a stupendous upgrade that he couldn't really understand. Next, the other energy that he could identify as magical energy was refined and converted into the new fire energy. The laws of life then formed some kind of imperceptible connection with this energy, making them united. And finally, these two energies filled up his entire body, completing his evolution. Finally, he heard a voice that would change his fate forever. As the first majestic and powerful phoenix in existence, I name you, Chad. Boom, sheer, Chad cried out one last time as flames burst out of its body. Soon after, he fell unconscious. It was obviously Eridel that affected the evolution in the last moment. He didn't really do much, just changed his fire element affinity into fire laws affinity and used those fire laws to establish his mana. He thought it was a shame for the first phoenix on his planet to utilize trashy flames that anyone decent could use too. However, they were just fire laws. If the phoenix wanted to create the special phoenix flames, it would be through his own comprehension. As for his name, Eridel thought it was just too suitable. He had seen his memories and deemed him worthy of the name, Chad. Eridel looked at the sleeping phoenix that was slumped on the floor by the lake. The others surrounded him with awe in their eyes, reminiscing the scene that had just happened. Only the male chicken that had also evolved had a shockingly calculative look in his eyes. Eridel knew those eyes, and knew what was to come. Although he was a little surprised that such a lowly creature had such intelligence, it wasn't impossible. He also didn't care. He grabbed the phoenix and all the chickens with his primordial essence, ignoring all the shocked expressions, and sent them flying off to another continent. The western continent to be exact. The central continent was becoming a little packed with powerhouses, especially the eastern forest, so he decided to relocate the phoenix, sending him to the Grand Forest in the western continent. The Grand Forest was the biggest forest there, with towering trees located in the very center of the continent. The names of the continents and forests were up for the residents to decide, so he just gave them simple names for now. After dropping the chicken, he returned his attention to the Tree of Life. The first generation would be born soon. Despite already knowing what was going to happen, he was a little excited. Mentally nodding in satisfaction, he changed the focus of his attention again. It was finally time. The dragons can now wake up. 10 comments, 0 vote. The dragons awaken. The reason that Eridel had left the dragons on a forced hibernation till now was because the regular dragons still had remnant essences of destruction in their bodies. So he had two choices. He could remove the essences of destruction for free, although it would cause a bit of pain because of how attached it was. Or, he could leave it, and wait for the magical energy outburst to forcefully complete their dragon transformation. In that situation, they would gain resistance to the laws of destruction and gain better talents in the process. All they had to do was survive until the magical outburst, and it needn't be said which option Eridel chose. Just to clear things up, a magical outburst is when magical energy suddenly increases all around the planet while at the same time forcefully entering all the things that could accept it. The biggest magical outburst was always when a world upgraded, especially when magical energy was appearing for the first time, like now. That was why everyone was entering the first realm of cultivation. The more talented ones directly entered stage 2 or higher of the first realm. The ones who already had mana experience 1 or 2 breakthroughs. Even Dodo broke through to stage 2 of the spiritual beast realm. As a matter of fact, because of this crazy outburst, every tree became a magic tree. This is a fact that would cause millennial monks to cough blood with shock. And the reason for this was that every other world would never have a magical outburst this generous. There was a big difference between the Eridel world magical energy and foreign world magical energy. Let's start off with the fact that magical energy is fundamentally blue in color if you could see it. But this freak of nature Eridel had somehow influenced the magical energy released on his planet, causing it to be gold in color. But the influence didn't stop at just color. Now, the always unaffiliated and most impartial magical energy had an affinity with souls. This meant that everyone in Eridel's planet would passively have their soul nourished by magical energy, and inanimate objects were more likely to birth a consciousness if they were strong enough. It would also passively increase intelligence. So who knew what would happen to the trees in the spirit stage? Would they be dumb like the trees in other worlds? All this soul affinity was a result of the obvious cause of this magical energy mutation, Eridel's primordial essence, a soul energy that has been his biggest helper so far. When Eridel noticed this, he was delighted. Maybe this was the ticket to becoming a world that surpassed the laws. The other difference in this outburst and the others was that in other worlds, magical energy was too picky in who it benefited. It would only enter physically strong and talented bodies, and it would do that each outburst. This caused a divide between geniuses and the commoners, causing their worlds develop strength-based hierarchies and big dog eat little dog concepts. However, in Eridel's world, magical energy invaded everything. For now, everything that contained life already had mana. Though in future, when new trees grew and beast bloodlines degenerated back to the level of ordinary wild beasts, it wouldn't be as perfect anymore. At least, unlike other worlds, the foundation here was very, very, very strong. And only extremely unfortunate beasts would be so dumb as to let their bloodline degrade that low. Back on the dragons, it would seem that they had all not missed out on the benefits of the magical outburst. Gaia didn't let down her stupendous talent and had actually broken through to stage 3, this was even despite the fact that the magical energy had to convert into creation mana instead of ordinary mana. This breakthrough increased her strength by leaps and bounds and increased her size to 5 meters long. Her horns and claws also grew while her golden scales shone a little brighter. Kaumila and Eshma broke through to the second stage. Their claws seemed to have copied their horns, becoming black and swirling with destruction essence. They both grew to 4 meters long. Every other dragon also entered the second stage, showcasing their talent with magical energy. On top of that, they were all full-on dragons now, with everyone gaining wings on their backs, horns that grew out the skull and a dragonoid body. This event naturally caused Eridel to be excited, and he decided to wake everyone apart from Gaia and the destruction dragons up. At the moment, the destruction dragons were too ruthless, too strong and too talented. They would completely collapse the ecosystem if they were allowed to run wild. Especially with that prick Eshma there. When a few beasts entered the late stage, stage 7 to 9, that's when he would release the destruction dragons. At that time, they wouldn't just dominate everything on sight and would actually have to work to get things. As for Gaia, it was better to leave her with the destruction dragons for now. If she reacted negatively to them, at least she wouldn't be able to kill their defenseless bodies. As the dragons began to wake up one by one, Eridel quickly created an underground cave with a concealed pathway to the surface and left the destruction dragons there along with Gaia. At first the dragons were disorientated, having slept so long, but they quickly discovered the changes in their bodies and the lack of pain. This caused them to roar with excitement. Raa! Raa! These roars, well, they tried their best. They're only newborns after all. Eridel looked at the dragon who started the first roar. There were a few alphas here, but he was the biggest. Bigger horns, denser scales, broader wings, majestic golden eyes and a longer tail. Oh, the tail tip was even spiked. Actually, a few dragons here had augmentations like that, but they were quite crude. Spiked backs were seen and spiked wings too, but they were so poor and ugly that they couldn't be useful for anything and weren't worth mentioning. But this alpha's tail had a spike at the tip that looked very sharp. ... Another Chad. 7 comments 0 vote. The surprise of the human race. Eridel watched as the dragons began to expand their territory. When they realized that they were no longer dying, they decided to have more fun. They no longer needed to huddle together to survive. And as expected, they quickly conquered the surrounding areas, claiming a large territory. But unfortunately, they seemed to have discovered a desire to destroy. They would purposefully wreck the area when fighting, not caring about the resources in the area and causing the landscape to turn rather ugly. Eridel could deduce that this was a side effect of absorbing the laws of destruction when they didn't have a strong enough mind to reject the instincts of those laws. Sigh, I can only hope they grow out of these habits when they evolve more and gain a greater intelligence. Eridel was disappointed with their actions. He could predict that things would be worse than the Snake Clan here, and they were certain to be more tyrannical. Currently, the humans were doing pretty well over in this forest, but that probably wouldn't last much longer. However, the humans had also evolved, developing a mana core in the center of their chest and mana circuits that ran through their entire body, gaining the ability to cultivate. This was a turning point for the humans. Something that was not supposed to happen for millions of years was already happening. But unfortunately for them, while they were able to gain a memory inheritance of basic mana maneuvering, courtesy of Eridel, they had no other cultivation techniques, a fatal weakness for the humans. Eridel couldn't even help them with that even if he wanted to, and he didn't want to. This was because none of his own memory inheritances covered any type of cultivation technique to speak of. He just got primordial essence for free. So the humans will have to trial and error, or steal from a foreign world. But the human race wasn't completely useless. In fact, some of them had greatly surprised Eridel. First were the humans in the Central Eastern Forest, the most dangerous place in the world with the lowest human survival rate. At the moment, there were only 2,000 humans left there. It seemed that it was certain that they would face extinction without resistance. But something changed. The magical outburst arrived and they evolved like everyone else. But unlike the other humans, they didn't gain mana cores or mana circuits. Instead they gained bulking muscles filled with immense strength and vitality. They grew to a collective average height of 2.5 meters tall and the blood that flowed through their veins seemed to boil with some kind of essence. It was magical energy. Instead of them gaining mana circuits, their own blood became the hosts of their magical energy. This was even more primal than the beasts that had gained beast cores. Ever since this evolution, they had become much more ferocious. They were no longer foraging for fruits like rabbits but viciously charging at others with the intent to kill and devour. They seemed to have learned from their previous tormentors, the wolves, and started to team up against their enemies, becoming warlike in nature and undaunted in front of adversity. They had clearly become barbarians. These barbarians were incredibly strong and only got stronger when they ate the meat of their prey, especially when that meat was saturated with magical energy. This evolution was a result of their leader. A leader that only had hatred and brutality in his mind. He hated that his people were always hunted. He hated that while his tormentors could always eat the meat of his people, he could only eat the plants in the surroundings like the other prey. He hated that he could not feast on his enemies as they feasted on his people. He hated that he was weak. He hated and hated and hated. So when the magical outburst came around, his evolution was influenced by the thoughts that plagued his mind 24/7. And the thing about evolutions is that if you were the uncontested leader or the alpha of a group, had a heart-to-heart connection with them and they followed you unconditionally, their evolutions would be influenced by yours without failure. This brought about the beginning of the barbarian race. Currently, these ferocious barbarians were in a war with the nightmare wolves, the evolved race of the wolves that had previously terrorized them. Eridel watched as they crudely battered at them with their giant fists. It couldn't be helped, they had no martial skill to speak of. But it didn't seem to matter. The nightmare wolves' special ability to induce fear on their enemies was redundant on the barbarians that had only the thought of killing on their mind. Eridel turned his attention to another group of humans that had caught his attention. This was the group in the southern plains of the eastern continent. Here, an extremely intelligent human was born. Eridel actually remembered this girl. Her intelligence was actually somewhat of an accident. Have you ever been so bored and done something crazy for fun knowing you could delete it or get rid of it later? Well, Eridel didn't get rid of it. Deciding to test what would happen if he gave a human an extremely high intelligence to the point that it made AI look dumb. But the result was disappointing. Other than a higher curiosity and cautiousness than her peers, she didn't do much. So Eridel lost interest. Somewhat of a mistake. 2 weeks after her birth, this woman had come to a conclusion. I am the Supreme One, is what could be interpreted from her thoughts. She could tell that everyone else apart from her was just too lowly. They couldn't compare to her at all. She had to give them the answers to everything. From then on, she began to show shocking miracles to her fellow humans, rallying them under one banner. Even if it was tedious, she didn't stop helping out her peers. Although they are stupid, they are my people, is what could be interpreted from her thoughts. 1 month after her birth, she had come to a conclusion. My race is the supreme race. The woman had seen the other species. And only one thought came to her mind when she thought of them, whether they were weak or strong. Dumb, dumb. So dumb. 15 comments 0 vote. Pride is my birthright. The woman only had disdain for the other species that either hopped around like idiots, sat around like idiots, or ate others like idiots. Looking at her people that had learned the concept of creation from her, she couldn't help but beam with pride. The only thing that she held a lick of respect for was the sun. When it shone bright and hung in the sky, it overpowered everything. No one could even look at it without feeling pain in their eyes. That's what she wanted, a power that none dare to withstand. But I will not fall when the night comes, I will be supreme forever, is what could be interpreted from her thoughts. Hubris filled her heart and she was drunk with pride. This pride kept rising and rising and rising without stop. And eventually the magical outburst came. Similarly to the barbarian man, her psyche had influenced her evolution. But unlike the coarse and rough but powerfully built barbarians, her evolution took on an opposite form, becoming a heavenly beauty. Growing to the height of 1.8 meters tall with high and proud breasts, a slim waist and wide hips. Her perky buttocks and thick thighs were not lacking in the slightest either. Yet despite this, she could be considered to be slender overall, giving a majestic and pure aura. Her hair had grown longer, reaching her waist and giving the impression of a golden sea, especially with the way it shimmered in the sun. Her eyes were of an even brighter gold, the unconcealed domineering and proud glint looking like it wanted to surpass the sun itself. She even shone with a golden light, a light that was clearly magical in nature. This was the result of the light affinity she gained with her evolution. Furthermore, her mana core was actually in her head and was shaped like a geometric sphere rather than the regular smooth sphere that every other human had. It must also be mentioned that the mana circuits in her body were ridiculous. Normal magical circuits were still innately biological and could be considered somewhat of an organ. However, this was actually a flaw. Flesh would always interrupt with the workings of the ethereal magical energy, plus, just like any other part of the body, it could gain impurities. But what was the situation for this woman? Her mana circuits were actually made of solidified magical energy itself. This ensured that her affinity with any kind of essence would always be high. Mana would seamlessly pass through her circuits and they would never gain impurities. Even more terrifying was the fact that her intelligence increased. This was actually the byproduct of the strange mana core she had in her head. It makes one shiver in fear wondering what she would do once she gained knowledge. And this blessing extended to all over her followers, making the woman a progenitor just like the barbarian chief. The thing about progenitors was that they were the origin of their bloodline or race. Those of the same affiliation could never disobey. It should also be mentioned that no one could reach the perfection that their progenitor obtained. They were just descendants or cheap copies after all. Even in this new race, the magical mana circuits they obtained were not as pure and the intelligence they gained while extremely high wasn't even 10% of what their progenitor obtained. But looking at their exaggeratedly handsome and beautiful visages and apex physiques that had a collective average height of 1.8 meters with toned muscles primed for any kind of physical activity, their superior mana core and mana circuits, their intelligence, all these things that made them human but amplified to stupid levels. They could only be called high humans. The woman immediately discovered the difference in her body, even memorizing the entire transformation process to later use that knowledge in a possible experiment or further research. She felt the power coursing through her body that she quickly found out was similar to the sun. Something that made her giddy with joy. Then she looked at her people who had also evolved, instantly discovering the change in their appearance, alertness in eyes and the power in their bodies. They had all clearly become upgraded, filling her with pride. My race is really the supreme race. We are blessed by the sun, is what could be interpreted from her thoughts. Although no one else was gifted with the light affinity, she still considered her entire race blessed by the sun. The pride in her eyes was so disgustingly prominent that it looked like it would soon start bleeding out. But for a moment she actually looked at the sun with respect, but that was soon swamped with disdain. It was clear that she was looking down on the sun, looking down on the fact that it cowered from the night. She actually began to think that sooner or later she would surpass it. Hubris. But if you think about it, this also couldn't be helped. She had no elders or past history warnings or any kind of thing to warn her that too much arrogance could possibly lead to self-destruction. So what could possibly happen to her when she was only becoming greater and greater, fueling her pride that never stopped growing? To her, it was her birthright. Why should she stop it? That was like asking her to take away her intelligence. Foolish. Unfortunately, just like the barbarians took their chief's ferociousness and brutality. These high humans took on their leader's superiority complex, but funnily enough, they were actually very harmonious with each other. But when they saw others of a different race, they became like kings and queens that saw a frog in their castle. Ha 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 ha, they would point fingers at other animals as if the other species were circus clowns. They actually found the stupidity of other races so hilarious that they discovered how to laugh. Eridel watched these pompous high humans with amusement. Although they were annoying, he could definitely appreciate their use to the overall world's progression. In fact, they were already learning to fiddle and create things with spare parts they could grab. This was something he needed. With satisfaction coursing through his soul, Eridel turned to the last group of human irregulars. But this one actually put a damper on his excitement. Looking at their red eyes and sinister gazes, Eridel couldn't help but contemplate. Fiends, how interesting, it all started with a hungry man that was tired of being hungry. 9 comments 0 vote. The crying ghost. In this world, the strong were privileged. It sounded cliché, but it was true. Those that could survive going out to gather food and resources were praised. Those that could only live on others like a leech were disdained. This man was a leech. He had no talent, he had no strength, he had no wisdom. He was weak, so just like the others, he was ignored. The food he was given was the bare minimum, eventually making him become malnourished. With no food, no magical herbs, no nothing. He became even weaker. Luckily, the concept of bullying didn't even exist yet. Otherwise you could imagine what would happen. But this man wasn't quite like the others. He was insatiable. Food. His eyes were opened terrifyingly wide with desire and desperation, the burst blood vessels in his eyes making him look more horrifying. The way he bent his fingers to emulate claws, helplessly grabbing at the air. It was like a chained ghost that had suffered thousands of years full of starvation had possessed him. The unintelligible howls that he screeched didn't improve the image. Strength. Copious amounts of saliva spluttered out of his mouth. His peers only looked once before shuffling away. He's going crazy again, is what could be interpreted from their thoughts. They couldn't understand why this one always got like this when he was denied more food. He was weak. Why does he have to be so angry? Ira Karai. The man let out an even more terrifying scream, venting his frustrations. He was very, very angry. Why did they deny him so? Was it wrong to eat until his belly no longer hurt? Was it wrong to seek strength? Wouldn't it only benefit them if he became strong? Why did they deny him? Why? Era! Screeching like a banshee and slamming his arms against the ground like a savage gorilla. It was quite petrifying. Do they want me to die? A normal person in his position would think, do they hate me? But first of all, he was obviously not normal, and 2, there were no levels of evil here apart from death. In his mind, such a thing as hate, bullying, just taking the piss out of you, did not exist. Since they acted like this towards him, they want me to die. The man clawed at the dirt in his hands and repeatedly banged his head on the ground, his spine-chilling eyes becoming more red. But even as he knocked his head on the ground, his eyes never left the bodies of his peers. I want to eaaaaattt. An ugly emotion was born in his heart, consuming his mind like an all-encompassing black cloud. For the first time in the history of humanity, hatred was directed at another of the same race. The desire that a predator had for prey was directed towards those of the same race. The desire to kill, no, it was the desire to murder, was born. Over the next few days, the death rate had somehow increased, confusing and worrying the ignorant humans. They thought that made a new group of predators hand encroached on their territory. But that was not true. The reason was none other than the insatiable man, who we will call the crying ghost for now. Crying ghost was still weak, so it wasn't like he was killing people with his power. But what he did was far more sinister. He would tag along with the foragers when they went out looking for food, and when they were severely weakened by predator attacks, he would go for the kill. After separating them from the rest of the group, he would use a broken stalactite that the humans used as a weapon and sneak up on them, literally stabbing them in the back. He would then voraciously eat their remains, especially targeting the blood, claiming that the sense of revenge and victory made it sweet. Each time he did this, he became stronger. Even if it was human flesh, he was eating meat while others were eating plants. Not only was he getting the nutrients from the meat, but he was absorbing the essence in their blood that came from them eating essence-rich herbs. Despite the fact that he returned home alone nearly every time, no one suspected him. This was because it was completely out of their imagination, and what you can't imagine, you can't guess. That's like expecting someone to know what flying means even if they've never seen a bird before. So they used their limited imagination to guess that he might have found a super herb that was making him stronger and stronger. After that they didn't think much, they only thought that there was now another expert to help them gather food. So the crying ghost kept on with his devious actions, becoming stronger and stronger. Soon enough, he became the strongest. This caused others to admire him. But if they had any decent knowledge, they would have suspected the red in his eyes that only ever kept increasing, nearly touching his iris. At this point he was frighteningly addicted to blood. This wasn't the affect of the blood itself but the result of the rush he got each time he satisfied his vengeance. But he didn't know that untied the existence of this rush to the blood and what the mind wholeheartedly believes, the body follows. Soon, he began to covet the blood of stronger beings. He wanted to drink the blood of those that used to frighten him in the past, the beasts. But he was pretty smart at this point. The blood he absorbed nourished his whole body including his brain, so he knew that if he went out to attack those terrifying beasts, his life would be in danger. So he hatched a hair-raising plan. In his clan of 8,000 humans, he decided to start a competition. He forced everyone to pair up with a partner, causing great confusion, but they complied because he was the strongest. He naturally couldn't communicate, so things were a bit of a struggle, but he managed to eventually convey his intention to have them fight to the death. 9 comments 0 vote. Rise of the Blood Fiends. Blank. Monarch's message. This chapter is slightly gruesome, so for the viewers of faint hearts, beware. Blank. Naturally, the humans were shocked. For a few seconds they couldn't even comprehend what they were being told. Kill one another. It didn't make sense. Why should they kill each other? Didn't you kill for food? Why? But the confusion passed and then they were soon angry. How could he possibly ask them to kill each other? The previous leader was the first to start growling, waving his arms in protest. Even baring his teeth and taking a threatening step forwards like he intended to fight. He was smart and knew that the others would back him up if he started a fight with this villain. He wasn't wrong. The others started to surround the crying ghost in preparation to take him down. Glee filled the old leader's heart. He had always been miffed about the fact that his position was taken, but there was now an opportunity to take it back. With a wide grin on his mouth he shook. Single quote question mark single quote. The old leader didn't even manage to think a final thought before his head rolled off his body, blood gushing out of his neck as his body collapsed. ERH. The humans screamed in fear, running back from the corpse of their old leader and his killer. Crying Ghost flicked his weapon, causing blood to fly out and stain the grass. With a sinister grin on his face, he bent down and began to feast on the corpse of the old leader, striking terror in the hearts of the viewers. Unfortunately, not all were disgusted. It suddenly occurred to them that if other predators can use them for food, why can't they eat each other if need be? Some of them actually had the light of greed shine in their eyes as they watched, but they didn't dare to act. The power of Crying Ghost terrified them far too much. But when Crying Ghost finished eating, licking the blood on his fingers and stood up in satisfaction, pointing towards them and signifying them to partner up and fight, the greedy ones suddenly understood and became excited. Just like that, the culture within this clan of humans was undergoing a massive shift. Under Crying Ghost's oppressive coercion, they all fought to the death, leaving only 4,000 members alive. The ghastly sight of thousands of clansmen dying caused everyone to pale, but Crying Ghost only watched with delight, etching his face. He had discovered a new activity that pleased him very much, and that was to watch fools kill each other like beasts. A desire that would cause the hearts of millions to quake with fear. Crying Ghost then indicated for victors to eat their fallen victims. A shocking but predictable action, taking his motives into consideration. He was trying to raise warriors after all. Unsurprisingly, there wasn't much resistance here. They were all hungry, they were all scared, and there were no morals to keep them from completing this action. No one to tell them that what they were doing was cannibalism and therefore unethical. So they ate, and as they ate, they quickly discovered the rising power in their bodies. This caused them to moan with delight, with the fear within them rapidly decreasing. They ate and sucked every last bit of essence from their own brethren. Finally experiencing what it meant to be full in the new power in their body, they looked at their leader with reverence, vowing to obey whatever he said. It was a pity, but they were a primitive species at the moment. They lacked the mental capabilities to deny the instincts of their bodies, so when their instincts told them that following this new leader would grant them benefits, the idea of disobeying didn't even exist. A few hours later a new round took place, leaving only 2,000 clan members alive. Although there was fear in the beginning, that was only because of the fear of losing and consequently dying. They still ended up complying in the end, their minor sense of guilt being consumed by their rising strength. The next day, the process repeated. This time there was no hesitation and only 1,000 fierce and vigorous humans were left alive. At this point, all of them had a ring of red around their eyes, causing them to look extremely terrifying. In this entire process, all of them had become strong. However, they had also become quite vicious, viewing human life as nothing but potential resources. If they had morals, this could have been avoided even if they repeated the act 10 more times. But there were no morals here. Only instincts dictated their lifestyles, and their instincts had told them that their fellow clansmen were better off dead and in their belly. Even so, they didn't dare to covet their leader. They knew how strong he was and none of them believed that they had the ability to take him down. More importantly, he might have more tricks to help them get stronger. And he did. From then on, he boldly started to hunt on the other species of the forest along with his other clansmen, causing panic to spread out without restraint. In this process, the humans became stronger and stronger, but at the same time, they became a lot more vicious. At this point, even if Crying Ghost didn't order them to kill anymore, they would still go out to perform mass genocides. The reason being the fact that their instincts told them so. At this stage of their primitive lives, instincts developed and vanished like rain in a storm. So it was understandable for them to so easily forget their foraging lives and move on to the path of executioners. And this was extremely terrifying because instincts were a living being's foundation. No matter what morals you developed in the future, it would always align with your instincts in some way. So when you have a sinister instinct like, kill anything, even your own family for power, lives are just resources, you can only turn out to be an evil person. Like this, life continued and terror spread across the entire forest. Soon, the magical outburst arrived, causing grand changes to the human marauders that seemed to make it their mission to destroy peace, and it went without saying that there was no way these fiends could end up remaining regular humans. Crying Ghost roared out in pain as massive changes occurred in his body. First, his skin peeled off, an eerie pale skin replacing the old. Next, his nails and teeth sharpened like that of a beast. His body started to grow, reaching a whopping 2 meters tall. His hair became the color of crimson blood, and last but certainly not least, his eyes became completely red. Not only were they red, but they even shone like stars, causing any viewer to shiver with fear. This transformation repeated itself in all of his followers, only, they didn't grow like him, nor did they gain red hair. But they all gained the red eyes, pale skin, sharp claws and shark-like teeth of their progenitor. Behind him was the vague illusion of a blood-curdling red sea. This was the hair-raising result of Crying Ghost establishing mana using the blood element and entering body refining stage 1. First realm of human cultivation. When their transformation was over, they all looked at one another, feeling the slight intimacy and affinity of blood that they each had, then they looked at their now extremely handsome progenitor that made this all happen. They then started to scream out loud in celebration, respect and reverence in their eyes. If they knew how, they would probably be prostrating themselves. After that, they continued to hunt. However, this time, it wasn't just to become strong. It was for pleasure. Yes, they now found pleasure in the act of killing as if it were a game. Definitely the influence of Crying Ghost. All of them had sinister looks in their spine-chilling eyes as they cut down their prey and sucked out their blood and disregarded the flesh. Something they did after the taste of blood became like nectar to them, making the taste of flesh dogshit in comparison. Thanks to their new constitution, they didn't need solid food to survive anymore. As a matter of fact, not only could they live on blood, their efficiency in absorbing essence from blood had become 90%, only Crying Ghost had 100%. This was a dramatic increase from their earlier 5%, causing their strength to rise stupendously. Although other species could absorb the essence in blood, it was woefully inefficient and caused about 95% of it to be lost. No one with brains would do that. But this was how these fiends came to be, and in the end, it paid off. They were now gifted with 90% efficiency in absorbing blood. What a terrifying thought. As these evil creatures ran around the forest causing most of it to be colored red with blood, only one thought came to Eridel, who watched the sequences of events from the World Archive. Blood fiends. 14 comments, 0 vote. The real reason. Eridel could wipe out the blood fiends right now and they would vanish without resistance. But he actually needed people like them. He had already started secret side project. Demons, so what were blood fiends on top of that? There was nothing in existence that could survive without both order and chaos. When there was no chaos, there was no drive or reason to improve. No need to overcome adversities because there were no adversities, no need to be creative because there was no need for your creation. But with chaos, people strived to nullify it, people desperately improved themselves so that they weren't destroyed by chaos in turn, people evolved because chaos would destroy them if they didn't rise to the challenge. True, a world without chaos could survive, but as a result, the quality of talent would vanish like smoke, unstoppable and uncontrollable. Here's an example. Let's say there was a war around 2,000 years ago. Both sides had a few dozen immortals making it even, the war ends with your side winning and now there's peace. 2,000 years later, there's not a single immortal in your country. After all, there's no need to train so excessively. But what would happen if a power of that same caliber 2,000 years ago comes for you now? That's right, only death is the outcome. That's why Eridel needed a stable amount of chaos in his world. The strength and talent of his world would continue to increase, and when his world inevitably clashed with others they could rise to the challenge. He was determined in becoming a world that surpassed the laws after all. There was no way to escape conflict. On the flip side, order was also needed, no need to think too much, without it, a world would only self-destruct. The lack of order and the lack of chaos shared the same fate, but the lack of order was more vicious and swift. Just look at how self-destructive those blood fiends are. They don't know that by overhunting, they would eventually lose all prey. They would destroy the ecosystem of the forest and have to migrate or die. It couldn't be helped, they had no knowledge of these things. So what could Eridel do? Well, he was going to let things run its course. That's how Eridel was going to govern his world when it came to disasters. He would let his residents experience and fear them, using their all to prevent the same thing from occurring. Only when they had learned would Eridel step in for free. No need for any more lessons now that the answer to the equation was engraved in their brains. There was nothing important in that forest, so he would let it become a lesson for the fiends. It was for the greater good. Just like that, Eridel condemned hundreds of thousands of lives in that forest to death. This was a petrifying thought process, but Eridel didn't seem to realize. In fact, it's like he couldn't really think too deeply when it came to things that were related to improving the world. Just like the time he was irrationally angry being denied the ability to awaken magic energy and made that dangerous decision. Even now, his mind just seemed to pass over the costs of whatever improvement he was implementing, causing him to regard any cost as irrelevant. Unfortunately, Eridel didn't quite realize this yet. Speaking of self-destruction, it's about time I look into the real reason this world was on the verge of destruction when I got here. Eridel had always been planning on doing this, but he had always been so busy. Or rather, his narrow-minded focus in improving could finally be at rest for a little while and he could look at other things. Afterwards he would look at the first-generation elves that he could tell were being born outside of the archive. Being in the World Archive didn't stop time after all, but he could reverse time or fast forward up to current time. And reverse time he did. To the time before Eridel Domicus. In a certain region of space in the Lola galaxy, a peerlessly handsome man with long blonde hair and unfathomable purple eyes was floating in front of an insignificant low world. He was obviously an immortal, only immortals had the ability to leave their world and survive in space, even traveling through it. But the stage of his immortality couldn't be determined. Regardless of his level, even the lowest of the low immortal could destroy a defenseless world like this with ease. Reyes marveled at the world before him. A completely undiscovered world with no enlightened species, something that was so rare that an immortal had better chances of aging to death, something impossible. But here he was, in front of a completely defenseless low world whose fate now lay in the palm of his hand. He then smiled so gently, looking angelic in coordination with his handsome visage. But his next words would cause anyone to be downright horrified. This world is the perfect material for comprehending the laws of destruction. Yes, he actually planned on breaking this world's core in order to comprehend the resulting laws of destruction. Watching an entire world being ravaged by the laws of destruction alone, what could top that in the gains that a person watching would get in his comprehension of the destruction laws? Reyes easily slipped through the world's atmosphere and burrowed through to the center of the world. When he found the core, he struck out with his hand, only causing enough damage for a crack to appear. Still with that damn smile on his face. He nodded his head in satisfaction when the laws of destruction started to seep out. Afterwards, he sat down, closed his eyes and crossed his legs with both palms on their respective knees, lotus position. This was the optimum position when cultivating. It helps the mind enter a smooth state of meditation, slightly increasing the effect of comprehension. And just like that, months passed by as the entire world was ruthlessly ravaged. 11 comments 0 vote. First generation elves. Reyes had spent 9 months there when he was interrupted by a sudden sound. Bip bip bip. Reyes's eyes dipped in frustration. He had already sent a message that he was going into seclusion and yet someone still dared to disturb him. Reaching into his pocket, he yanked out a strange rectangular device the size of a phone. But it was not quite a phone, or was it? Sounds that were clearly a man speaking in a slightly frantic manner came out of the device. At this point, even if it wasn't a phone, it was definitely some kind of communicator. The look on Reyes' face changed as he finally understood the point of this message. His eyes turned cold with a barely hidden glint of anger. His face then turned into one of regret as he looked at the world core. "I'll be back soon," he curtly said to the device. Resuming his look of tranquility, he stood up and disappeared. The laws of space, Eridel thought. Eridel didn't really know how he felt about this scene of events. He wasn't angry, but nor was he okay with anything that transpired here at all. Maybe it was because it happened before he became the world itself that he didn't entirely feel it happened to him. But whatever the case, it was a dangerous situation. There was actually an immortal that knew where he was. On top of that, the event happened months ago, so there was no way to track him at all. Otherwise, Eridel would have found a way to get rid of him once he was capable. It was too dangerous for other people to know of his existence. Well, his body's world existence. No one would find out his soul that inhabited this world. Well, even if he wanted to go after that fellow, he wasn't capable at all. He was an immobile planet, how could he chase anything? More than that, his ability to manipulate worlds didn't extend outside of his territory. The reason he said territory was because he had been working on a hair-raising scheme that would allow him to extend his sphere of influence outside of just his mere one world. At that point, calling him a world wouldn't be satisfactory anymore, he would be something more. Ha, how troublesome, even if this guy thinks the world is destroyed by now, he might come back. Eridel felt like he was going to have another migraine like the time he was with Syrah, which didn't even make sense since he didn't even have a brain anymore. Speaking of Syrah, it was about time he checked on her and the elves, they should have been born by now. With thousands of different schemes focused solely on countermeasures against Reyes, Eridel exited the World Archive. He'd been here long enough. It was time to do something new. But first, the elves. Central continent. Center of the eastern forest. Surrounding the spring of life were roughly 200 figures clambering about carrying various materials to different locations. It was mostly wood, but there was some stone to be found as well. When Eridel first saw this, he was slightly shocked. He didn't give the elves any ability or supernatural intelligence that would help them discover how to create houses after mere days of existence. Even the High Human Queen of the East was only just discovering how to dig caves underground to use as shelter. While the thought of building up occurred in her head, she hadn't yet thought of a way to stick parts together. So she had to content herself with living underground like the animals for now, something that really wounded her pride. But after peering into their souls, he found out that the elves were actually obeying the instructions of their queen to build basic dwellings. Now it was a lot more believable. The queen had a lot of knowledge as a result of her contract with Syrah, so something like this was nothing to her. Knowledge and intelligence were two very different things. Knowledge is the collection of experiences someone may have. For example, knowing what a car is, knowing how to ride a bike, knowing how to eat. This is all knowledge, but just because you had knowledge doesn't mean you know how to do any of those things. And this is where intelligence comes in. Intelligence is the ability to comprehend something and use that understanding in action. Intelligence could also be considered an automatic calibration. For example, without intelligence, even if you knew how to eat, would you know how to hold the spoon so that the food doesn't fall out? Would you even know how to chew food in a way that you didn't choke yourself to death? No matter how easy it was to know of the concept, chew your food with your teeth, taste with your tongue, blah blah blah, knowledge does not cover how to react in abstract situations that intelligence automatically helps you correct. For example, let's say you learned how to drink water but you drink the water and it goes down the wrong way, cutting off your breathing. It was intelligence that let you know that something had gone wrong and you needed to rectify the situation. No amount of knowledge would help you if you had no intelligence. Intelligence was also the ability to come up with more ideas using the knowledge that you already have. For example, now that I know how to use a spoon, I can guess how to use a fork. Even if the guess was wrong, you used intelligence to make a guess. Without intelligence, there would be no guesses. On the flip side, with no knowledge, there was no way to apply intelligence. Even if you had an IQ over 9,000, if you didn't even know what a house was, how can you think of a way to build one? Monarch's note. Apologies for the info dump, but this could be information that could be useful for you guys, or maybe you found the excessive information annoying and for which, I apologize. Closing curly bracket. This was why the high human queen was at a disadvantage compared to the elven queen who had both knowledge and intelligence in quantitative amounts. Unfortunately for the human, Eridel had not a lick of desire to help her. She would have to go through trial and error like the primordials on every other planet. Looking at the fairy-like elves that had supernatural beauty and charisma, Eridel couldn't help but feel proud. But what got him the most excited was their potential. 15 comments, 0 vote. Pissed. Download the app for additional rewards. More events, more perks. Winning you more free perks. Download now. SolitaryMonarch. Download app now. Creating a. The reason Eridel was excited about the potential of the elves was because they had yet to experience a magical outburst. When they were in their cocoons, the magical energy was unable to breach through. This was because the cocoons had a protective mechanism that prevented all invaders even if it came with good intentions. But now that they were outside of their cocoons, as long as they didn't establish mana and enter stage 1 of their cultivation, they could evolve into something greater. As it is now, all of these elves were origin elves. They had no ancestors, they had no bloodline to follow and evolve, they themselves were the ancestors. This meant that before entering stage 1, they could augment their existence however they wished. Entering stage 1 was the same as setting your foundation, meaning, although you can continuously evolve in strength, you would never really break away from your species. Even with countless mutations, it wouldn't affect you that much. Unless, well, we'll leave that for another time. It was even worse for descendants even if they were second generation. They barely had any chance of changing or upgrading species even if they drank the blood of an entire race, at most, they could mutate. Of course, even as an origin life form, it still wasn't easy and numerous factors came into augmenting their species the way those 3 humans did, but at least it was doable. Originally, Eridel didn't care too much about whatever happened after the first elves came out, but seeing what happened to the human race with the barbarians, high humans and blood fiends, Eridel couldn't help but have high expectations. Eridel watched as Sira played with Dodo around her lake. Well, at least he thinks they're playing. Looking at how she repeatedly slapped him around while he tried to escape with tears in his eyes, he looks quite pitiful, right? Eridel didn't know why Sira couldn't sense him now. She did before when she was just born, so he was a little confused. Was the time when she looked directly at his viewpoint a fluke? Or did something change? ... She couldn't be waiting for me to call her first, right? Nevertheless, he had seen that she was okay and he had no further intentions of interacting with her. It was finally time to start his second big plan. Eridel focused his attention on his core, preparing for... Wait, Daddy, come back. Preparing for a long seclusion. With this plan, he would probably take a very long time, by mortal standards, to come back, so he felt a little guilty for leaving Sira without saying anything. You know what, I might as well say a quick bye. Thinking of the possibility that Sira might come to resent him for his neglect in future, Eridel was slightly disturbed and decided to make things clear with her just in case. He was already somewhat attached to his self-proclaimed daughter and he didn't want to burn bridges with her if it could be avoided. Eridel returned his attention to Sira. As a matter of fact, he could constantly hear and see everything in his territory, but it was more like a mortal's peripheral vision. He wouldn't hear clearly unless he focused on it. Ah, Daddy's back, he. Sira squealed with tears in her eyes. It would seem that Eridel had made her cry. I just wanted to say that I will be gone for a very long time, so take care of everyone while I'm gone, okay? Eridel didn't actually expect her to take care of them, instead he wanted the reverse to happen. He only said that to give her a distraction while he was away. And the effect was immediate. Sira cutely raided her hand in an army salute and said with a wide grin. Oh, okay, you can leave them to me. Completely ignoring the part where he said he'd be gone for a long time. Eridel couldn't help but marvel at her childishness despite having some of his memories, but thinking further about it, it was only right. Even if she had his memories, she was still a newborn with a childish mentality, so it was natural that things and phrases from Eridel's memories that were tailored for children was what she liked. Just because she had his memories doesn't mean she wanted to be like him. That was like a human mortal gaining the memories of an arrogant ancient immortal and suddenly calling everyone low life form trash. Eridel once again focused on his core. He could finally begin to focus on his second plan, which was creating a system. Yes, Eridel actually wanted to steal the idea of many typical isekai anime to create a system. However, the system he was making was different from that third-rate trash that he kept seeing over and over again. Okay, those systems weren't actually that bad, and in actuality, they would be a lot more helpful for the residents than the system he was going to make. But that was the point. The main way of gaining strength was still to diligently cultivate, and he would never change that. The system would be more of a super AI assistant that would be plugged in everyone's brain. Of course, there would be more benefits, but that could be discussed later. The point was that Eridel would never change his world into one that was kill enemies for express. Eridel was not a person that was so foolish as to turn his entire world into one filled with mass genociders. Nay, although he harbored suicidal thoughts in the past, that was no longer the case. Although it sounded all nice and dandy in those stories for a system that gives you express for killing monsters to be possessed by all those worlds, adventurers. The only reason that kind of world works is because the author says so. But this world is not a game. It is reality, and in reality, people possess insatiable greed and a desire to always want more. Eridel couldn't even remove this instinct from his own residents because of how needed this desire was at the same time. It was good for people to always want more, otherwise they would face stagnation, a word that strangely made him shudder, being content at merely doing enough to get by, not bothering to find ways to improve. But on the flip side, when doing heinous or devious things got you that more, as long as you didn't stop on the second or third time, you were definitely going to face addiction. So Eridel couldn't have this kill for express, no matter what. Even if he was to prevent killing from the same race giving you express, that would just initiate countless racial wars, tipping the balance between order and chaos forever. Eridel could list a million more reasons on why conventional systems were self-destructive, but he couldn't hold back his anticipation anymore. He wanted to make the system immediately. He had planned for a very long time, thinking of all the pros and cons of a system and how a true system should be, doing calculations upon even more calculations. He was ready. It was time. Eridel began to harness every single law. 17 comments, 0 vote. True perfection. Eridel's design for his system was heavily focused on potential, something that would only grow and grow until it became a behemoth-like existence whose existence was extremely beneficial to those it hosted. His intent was for the system to be something that would be able to assimilate all knowledge it came across and take control of all subconscious events and complete them with the most suitable method and in the most perfect way with no mistakes. For example, when evolving, there was always a chance of failure resulting in death or in some cases becoming some kind of eldritch abomination. Eridel wasn't against the existence of these abominations, but most of the time they ended up being a glass cannon, a ravenous destroyer, or completely useless. But no matter how they turned up, they would eternally suffer soul-deep pain and a complete lack of intelligence. This ended up in them subconsciously seeking lives to alleviate their suffering, causing mass destruction if they were capable, and being a complete menace to society. Nobody liked them, and to be honest, neither did Eridel. It was a little unfair since they ended up that way by accident, but it is what it is. Nobody would care if you were an angel before becoming a demon, just look at Lucifer. Eridel would at least tolerate the ones that had actual strength either to use them as whetstones or defenders, but the fact that they were always suffering just rubbed Eridel the wrong way, so he got rid of them on sight. But with the system, there was no longer any need. There would no longer be mistakes in evolution unless Eridel was feeling a little experimentative. In fact, each evolution and mutation would be the most prime for results, never becoming a case where someone evolved but they didn't really change much. Even when it came to cultivation, unless you did something stupid or your cultivation technique was trashy or you got sabotaged, you would never suffer cultivation deviation. A sinister phenomenon that occurred when something went wrong in someone's cultivation to the point it affected their foundation. At that point, if not corrected quickly, something that took Herculean effort, your entire cultivation would be wasted, or you would gain a heart devil. Something infinitely more terrifying to the point Eridel didn't even want to think about it. The point was, with the system, everything that was done mostly subconsciously, could be calibrated and perfected, granting the entire population perfect foundations. The only difference between people would then become cultivation technique, hard work and talent. Yet despite all this automatic calibration feature that already set the potential of this world ahead of many others was only one minor aspect of the system. One of the bigger aspects of the system was the Domicus records. Sounds a little familiar? Well, if you combined the Domicus family name and the legendary Akashic records, what would you get? Yes, the Domicus records. Eridel actually dared to covet something like the Akashic records. A compendium of all universal events, thoughts, words, emotions and intent ever to have occurred in the past, present, or future in terms of all entities and life forms. This is something that Eridel wanted to obtain, and he had inklings on how to do so. But it was hard. It was going to be so hard. Even when the system was complete and released onto his world, the Domicus records would be nothing like it should be. It would need a lot of time and a lot of nurturing. After all, the Akashic records in its beat-down form is a collection of all knowledge and possibilities. Something that knows everything. The ideology of the Akashic record was true perfection. Something that Eridel was actually trying to steer away from. To an inventor like Eridel, the most disgusting, heinous, filthy, repulsive and downright terrifying thing in existence was true perfection. True perfection meant that it could no longer be improved. There was no more need for ideas, hopes and dreams. No need for imagination. It is the perfect outcome. An item, a result, the finished and final product. How disgusting. Inventors always chased the idea of perfection because it was supposedly the greatest achievement possible. Flawless, peerless and inexplicable indeed, but the true key point was the unobtainable. Inventors could keep rising, keep creating and keep dreaming if they chased perfection because there was something they hadn't reached, something that was above them, something they didn't even know existed, but just its idea was so seductive to them. But they must never have it. Because if they did, that was the end. A dilemma, conundrum and paradox. To want yet not to want. That was perfection. And to be fair, a lot of people were okay with the idea of stopping there, ending their life's journey at perfection. It wasn't a bad thing, to be honest. It was just the end, and all good things came to an end, right? But Eridel was not content. He didn't want perfect, he wanted greater. 100 times greater, 1,000 times greater, an infinity times greater. That was why Eridel did a little something to the Domicus records. Just a little tweak. He. Thinking this, Eridel began to arrange the laws in a petrifyingly intricate manner. Just looking at these runes caused Eridel of all existences a headache, and that was why this was going to be slow, long and arduous. But it would be oh so worth it. Just like that, years began to trickle like water. But that didn't mean life outside did. The dragons, snakes, elves, humans, fiends and other life forms were very much awake and very much free to do anything. What do you think could happen to these races in 127 years without Eridel's supervision? 17 comments 0 vote. Status of the Central Eastern Forest. In the first 30 years or so, things went as predicted, but there were indeed some crazy events here and there. Many elves were born, their culture developed and their overall power rose. Unfortunately, all the first-generation elves of that time weren't able to experience the magical outburst and had already entered cultivation, meaning no racial upgrades would happen like what happened in the humans. But that was nothing to worry about. New first-generation elves were being pumped out every month. When the world upgraded and became a mid-world, the newborn first-generation elves will experience the most benefits. That's of course if they met the criteria of a race upgrade, otherwise they would just experience the same thing as others. The queen had reached the 5th stage of mana refinement, which was extremely shocking, taking in the fact that her cultivation technique was of the most basic one in existence. Normally you couldn't even enter the mana refinement realm with a technique like that. The other core members weren't too bad either, with the highest entering the 6th stage of body refinement. This elf was a male named Alan. Besides their strength, the elves had completely taken the center of the eastern forest as their territory, and a large territory it was, roughly the size of the entire London and still expanding. It just goes to show how big the entire forest is. Even though their territory was so big, only 72,000 elves were living there, and only a tenth of their territory was used for living, with the rest used as hunting grounds, but even with that they still didn't fully occupy the entire living space. The reason for the large territory was, they were cultivators. Don't underestimate how powerful cultivators were, even if they weren't killing each other. These guys moved around so quickly that even if most of them were in the body refinement stage, running to the end of their territory was only a 5-hour run. The untold truth about cultivators was that the more powerful they were, the more fucking annoying they were when they created craters, scorch marks and dead magic zones all over the place. Real worlds weren't like those in games and stories where every crack in the ground from a punch, every crater from a fireball and every half-destroyed forest is ignored after the fight is over. The damage to the environment doesn't disappear when the scene is over. When people with power outgrew the level of their world, it wasn't rare for them to lay waste to everything each time they fought. This was why most of these worlds had rules that prevented people of that level from fighting each other unless necessary. Low worlds can't withstand cultivators at all. It was like planet Earth that Eridel came from. Mid worlds could only withstand attacks from realm 1 to 3 cultivators. For enlightened species that was body refinement, mana refinement and core refinement. For beasts that was magic beast, spirit beast and seeking beast. For monsters that was beginner monster, intermediate monster and elite monster. What are monsters, you say? Wait and find out. High worlds could only withstand attacks from realm 1 to 6 cultivators. No need to go into the names of the realms 4 to 6 when they weren't even close. Law worlds could withstand attacks from realm 1 to 9 cultivators. Again, no need for names. The only reason that Eridel's planet wasn't ravaged with environmental damage was the fact that for all intents and purposes, he could be considered a mid-world already. In fact, he actually surpassed mid-worlds in a few things. The only thing that was lowly about him was his size, no joke, PLZ being roughly the same size as planet Earth. This was obviously because of the special magical energy on his planet. This was why Eridel was fine leaving the species on his planet to freely develop. Here, whether a cultivator punched a tree or a stone, if they used full force they better be prepared to lose that hand. Anything that could be considered the nature of the planet, the earth, the trees, the stones. Anything that formed naturally would be hardened with the rest of the planet depending on its level. Magic trees are hardened even further based on their level. So a cultivator punching a wall was no different from a mortal punching a wall, except they had excessive force that couldn't go anywhere else other than returning back to sender. The result needn't be explained. Besides the elves in the center of the eastern forest, the 4 corners of the forest had also been claimed. The barbarians fought valiantly all over the place, slaughtering their previous oppressors and taking the east of the forest for themselves. Sadly, they were quite lacking in the intelligence department and still didn't have presentable homes, still living out in the open with the stronger of them living in caves. Despite the fact that their population couldn't compete with the cheating elves, they weren't doing bad at all. Most of their behavior was learned from beasts, so it was natural they discovered how to mate, something they had become very passionate about. If these muscleheads weren't training, eating or fighting, they were having sex. On a side note, their chief had reached stage 1 of mana refinement. In the west of the eastern forest lay the Snake clan. They had dominated the west and had even begun expanding out of the forest since they had learned from experience that competing for the rest of the forest was too much hassle. The executioner in the north was too scary. The 2-legged people in the center and east were equal in power to them with tactics to boot, and the pretender in the south was a pussy, running from the strong but killing their weak when they couldn't help in time. They didn't really claim more territory outside of the west of the eastern forest, but they did leave nests here and there, introducing their clan to the rest of the continent. Their main mission was mainly to explore, an order from the intelligent Jorma who had become a stage 1 spirit beast and reached 36 meters long. Draco and Lily had both become 7th stage magic beasts. Hikulu, the two-headed poison snake, had become a 9th stage magic beast. In the north was Dodo's territory, over there was the paradise for herbivores, only they were allowed access to the land there and any predators that intruded didn't leave with their lives. Dodo had yet to meet someone he could mate with because of his big size, but he did have a few dozen female elks, deers and moose that he was nurturing as concubines. He even slowed down his cultivation rate to wait for them to reach a size that could take him without much danger. Despite that, he still managed to become a 7th stage spirit beast. In his harem, the deers were suspiciously more prevalent. A horny elk he was. In the south lay a beast who had dominated the whole area, claiming himself to be the Beast King. But everyone else outside of the south called him the Pussy of the South, or sometimes Pretender of the South if they were feeling kind. This was Tiger King Reiko. 14 comments 0 vote. Anatomy refinement. Reiko was a tiger created in the south of the eastern forest. He wasn't all that special in the beginning. In fact, his innate ability was quite lacking compared to his brothers and sisters, which resulted in him being disregarded. Even then, it wasn't to the point where they outright ignored him or attacked him, they just didn't care about him either way. A very average tiger, he could have just lived life like that. He didn't have any lofty goals and he wasn't in any way deranged like the crying ghost. It wouldn't be a terrible life, just a very mundane one. Unfortunately, he encountered Draco of the Snake Clan. After that near-death encounter, Reiko seemed to have become a little wary about leaving his cave, even refusing to go and hunt. He lived in the outskirts of the tiger territory, so no one ever looked for him. But this situation only lasted 3 days before he was actually visited by Draco. With overbearing arrogance he would bully the tiger day after day, finding it amusing that there was actually a predator that didn't resist a beatdown. It's what happened the first time which is what got him intrigued and why he followed the tiger here. In truth, Reiko was just really afraid of pain, so he would always just focus on defense when being attacked, but if he had the advantage he would shamelessly act like some kind of ferocious predator. Eventually 8 months passed and yet, each day he was left almost dead and unable to leave when Draco left for the day. If Draco didn't feed him essence-rich herbs and carcasses, he would have long since left this world. But at this point Reiko was absolutely livid. He hated that fiery-looking worm, he hated his resplendent scales, he hated his imposing size. Why couldn't he, Reiko, stand out like that and bully others? At the very least, when the essence nourished his body it would automatically target the injuries and in the process, granting endurance to those locations. And since there was no place that hadn't been assaulted, his entire body was fully remade tougher and tougher each day. But it was on his 251st torment day, and having already suffered his 251st beating and being left to heal by the evil snake, that a shocking event that would change his life and the lives of those around him forever took place. Boom! An unfamiliar energy exploded out within him, enhancing the bones, nerves, tissues, organs and flesh all over his body. His muscles were especially upgraded. His body even began to grow, jumping a whole 3 meters in height, leaving him at 5 meters tall. It didn't even feel uncomfortable. In fact, it felt so good that Reiko let out a dignified roar that actually shook up the surrounding mountains. Psych! A mere magic beast roar wasn't even qualified to shake a bush, talk less of a mountain. But it did sound domineering enough, making all the beasts that heard instinctively have the urge to submit. The shocking thing was that some of them had a higher cultivation and yet they still quivered with fear. Although they could sense the vibe from the roar only being on the level of a stage 2 magic beast, the feeling they got from it wasn't inferior to those of the stage 3 magic beasts at all. This mysterious phenomenon was both inexplicable and terrifying. All they knew about the correlation between cultivation rank and strength was becoming undone and it wasn't making sense. But anyone with basic knowledge from another experienced mid-world could easily tell you that what was currently happening with Reiko was entering the first stage of anatomy refinement. Anatomy refinement was another method of cultivating strength, but this had nothing to do with harnessing magical energy, fire elements or lightning laws. Anatomy refinement was the act of using energy to directly increase the strength of one's physical body. Anatomy refinement could actually be simultaneously used with energy refinement cultivation, but most people didn't even dare to refine their anatomy, talk less of dual cultivating with energy. It was just too dangerous and most enlightened species couldn't handle it. It was a bit easier for beasts, but even then most still withheld from it. This was because it was too dangerous. Magic herbs weren't as common as grass like they were in Eridel's world. They were very rare, so how could they continuously use them like Reiko was doing? Even more, splitting your attention between energy cultivating and anatomy cultivating was counterproductive most of the time. Only the most talented sons and daughters of prestigious families could afford to do so. But this was Eridel's world, where it was easier to find a world tree than it was to find a single regular herb, so who knows? After all, that's exactly what was happening right now to some random tiger in the wild. The process of repeatedly destroying and healing your body with essence. The crudest way of anatomy refinement, but it is what it is. This was what happened to Reiko until he entered stage 1. But it was not over yet. The benefits of increasing your physical strength wasn't the only gift anatomy refinement had to offer. In fact, it was the second gift that had many people risking their lives to attempt it, even if most gave up. Suddenly, Reiko started to feel an itchiness all over his body that made him choke on his roar, and it soon became quite unbearable. He even began rolling and thrashing around in an attempt to alleviate the discomfort that was rapidly becoming pain. His screams were quite unlike the previous majestic roar. Now it was like a squealing pig that was being butchered. But soon, the culprit of this change of events revealed itself. A black and viscous liquid began to leak out of the pores all over the tiger's body like it was blood, which was a horrifying sight to see. Also, the disgusting smell of it didn't help the situation at all. It had to be one of the most rankest smells in existence. But to tell the truth, it wasn't all that unfamiliar. This is what happens to all enlightened species in the body refinement realm, but not on the level it was happening now. In fact, the stuff would only leave the body during excrement, making it especially smelly, not all over the pores like it was doing now, and it would never leave the body at the rate it was doing now, only doing so by small amounts, not even in 1,000th of the current visible in each of the 9 body refinement breakthroughs. It was all disgusting and horrendous, but this is what all cultivators dreamed about. The removal of impurities. 13 comments, 0 vote. Ambition. Each time someone had a breakthrough in the body refinement realm, they expelled impurities out of their body in the form of excretion. As a result, the body was cleansed and the resistance in essence flow was reduced, increasing your ability to wield your mana and enhancing your strength. A byproduct of this was that you also became more attractive. Clear skin, muscular physiques for males, soft bodies for females, and symmetrical faces. There was no such thing as an ugly cultivator. This didn't mean that beauty suddenly lacked value, it just meant that the bars were raised. But despite the concept of body refinement, even the most talented of cultivators would only get rid of 25% of his impurities before being forced into the mana refinement realm. These were the benefits of the body refinement realm, and they ended with the body refinement realm. Unless you took special treasures, you would never get further chances to remove the impurities in your body. Or at least that should be the case, but here's where anatomy refinement comes in. Anatomy refinement did the same things body refinement did on a much more stupendous scale, but just as a side effect. The point of anatomy refinement was to make the body tougher, stronger, faster. In fact, the intent of anatomy refinement was bodily perfection. Anything to do with the body was empowered each stage. Even things like coordination, dexterity, and cognitive abilities were improved. After all, improving the body meant improving the brain. Not only did this increase your talent for energy refinement by making the flow of mana in your body run 10 times faster, it increased your appearance by manifold. The 2 big reasons that cultivators salivated at the concept of anatomy refinement. The scary thing that many people didn't know was that anatomy refinement had no limit. As long as you had the will and the resources, you could technically reach stage 1000 or more, gaining a body that would be unscathed even if you threw a condensed universe at it. But there were 2 things to note here. 1, while the term will was used lightly. Just the refinement from stage 9 to stage 10 would require the will to withstand swimming in lava, and that was having it easy. Typically, all the impurities in the body would be vanquished at stage 10, so anatomy refinement stopped wasting time with cleansing the body and put its full attention on perfecting the body, increasing the effect and simultaneously the pain of anatomy refinement by multiple times. And 2, the resources required to enter something like stage 1000, wouldn't you need to empty out an entire universe or 2? At this moment in time, Reiko didn't have to worry about things like that. The breakthrough was over and he had to first get rid of all the trash on his body. After jumping in a nearby lake and cleansing his body, he came up to a clean side of the lake and finally got a good look at himself. The orange on Reiko's fur was turning gold with his black stripes looking more sleek and the underwhite looking as pure as snow. Even his facial structure and muscle ratio had changed, looking more handsome for a tiger and symmetrical. Reiko's change in appearance made him look majestic and imposing, giving off the impression of a divine beast king. After striking different poses and tooting his horn for a little while, he decided to flee from his location. Reiko wasn't dumb before, but now he was one of the smartest beasts in the entire world, and he knew that as long as he stayed here, the rank 4 at the time Draco would be back tomorrow to make his life hell. He knew that to get his revenge, he had to increase his strength and challenge the evil snake at a later point, and so now that his body was healthy and he actually had the capability to leave this time, how could he possibly be so foolish as to dilly-dally? From then on, Reiko began to move smarter. He conquered the weak and escaped from the strong until he could come back and defeat them. With his power, he swiftly started an uprising in the tiger hierarchy and achieved dominance over all tigers within 2 months. At that time, he had also become a 3rd-stage magic beast with the power of a 4th-stage magic beast. But he knew it wasn't enough to even hold his ground against the snake with perfect affinity with the laws of fire, even if he didn't know the source of his strength. Despite Draco still being a 4th-stage magic beast, he could easily deal with a stage 8 magic beast, so if Reiko wanted to compete, he had to reach a power level of stage 9 just to have an even fight. How did Reiko know? Well, he had once encountered the evil snake again and almost died. Using all kinds of shameless and unconventional techniques, he escaped the snake, who was using his full power to chase, allowing Reiko to feel the powerful vibe. Even then, there was no way he could contest with the powerful snake clan. Even if he somehow obtained revenge, they would never let him go, and if that was the case, he needed his own army. The tigers weren't enough. Their population was roughly 12,000 at this time, even though all of them throughout the forest had migrated to the south side, while the snakes had roughly 50,000 at this time. Snakes produced 10 to 30 eggs in one go after all. If not for them antagonizing Dodo, there would be a lot more. So how could Reiko get more subordinates? Well, how about other races? It was this thought that caused ambition to flood Reiko's heart, even causing his ravening desire for revenge to slightly diminish. Why must a powerful and handsome beast like him have to be content leading one race? There was no one but him and that devilish snake that he knew of that was better than him, and since taking care of that sinister snake was only a matter of time, he was the only one eligible to become the king of all beasts. 9 comments 0 vote. Beast King Reiko. Deciding that he was the chosen one, Reiko began to dominate throughout the forest, subjugating other species and stealing their resources. Monarch's note. In a world where every herb and such were already a resource, the more powerful and essence-rich herbs were considered the true resources. Natives of this world looked at low-grade herbs like they looked at grass, and truth be told, there wasn't much difference. Closing curly bracket. Reiko's actions finally caught the attention of the others in the forest, but they mostly took a wait-and-see approach, but some of them had greed and ambition control their thoughts. Whilst the concept of stealing and conquering existed, it wasn't really conquering. All they did was kill the original owners of the land and take the resources there. The thought of subjugation didn't occur to their primitive minds at all. The elves were especially excited about this new concept of subjugation, even if they would never admit to the fact that a mere beast had come up with the idea first. They thought of themselves as the natural rulers of the forest, and ideas to completely rule over every inhabitant began. It couldn't be helped. Every other race around them were completely lacking in comparison. All they did was eat and sleep. They didn't even have the ability to create proper homes. Even that other, counterfeit race, that looked like them were barely different from the other beasts. On the other hand, the elves had developed language, culture, arts and crafts, martial arts and more. As a result, this gave them a sense of superiority and entitlement to the entire forest. But just as the idea of domination was brewing and they were beginning to get excited, Titania put a stop to the idea completely, banning anyone from subjugating other races and threatening those that still harbored such thoughts with death. All the elves were perplexed, but they didn't dare to reject. They all knew that everything they obtained was a result of their queen's continuous blessings, so they didn't even feel upset. Whatever their queen said was more than law, it was the truths of the universe. So they could only watch as that upstart tiger continued to run around the south, conquering all the beasts and hoarding all sorts of treasures that he divided amongst his upper echelons, namely the Tiger Clan, Wolf Clan, Bear Clan, Monkey Clan and Eagle Clan. It was only after 2 years that he completed his goal: subjugation over the entire south, with all the inhabitants there hailing him as the Beast King. But of course it wasn't smooth sailing. There were numerous times that he got jumped by either the barbarians or the Snake Clan. Neither of them wanted to see him become a threat in future, so they repeatedly tried to kill him, only to regret it. Every time they attacked the south, that shameless tiger would always escape before sneaking into their respective territories and killing whoever he could, causing both the barbarians and the Snake Clan to feel both wrathful and helpless. Eventually, they all turned a blind eye to him and pretended he didn't exist. They couldn't afford for him to keep killing their younger generations, so they could only ignore him and wait for an opportune time. This allowed for Reiko to smoothly take over the rest of the south and become a 6th-stage magic beast, becoming the first Beast King in history. He lorded over various species and possessed boundless treasures, but it wasn't enough. That sinister snake could still easily kill him, and he couldn't obtain his revenge yet. There was something about that snake that set him different from other beasts. But even if the difference was incomparable, wasn't he the same? Thinking back on what changed his life, Reiko made a firm decision. He needed to improve his secret source of strength. It was the only way. He had been pondering over it over the years, but thinking of the pain always frightened him away from making a decision. But he had already become the Beast King, and he was nowhere near strong enough to challenge a single Draco, talk less of the Snake Clan. If he wanted his revenge, he needed more power. Reiko traveled to a location he had found on one of his adventures. It was a barren mountain that towered 15 kilometers high, but one of the strange things about it was that there was no life here at all, no nature and no animals. It was completely empty of life. Even more strange was the lightning that repeatedly struck the peak with an interval of 5 to 30 minutes. A strange phenomenon that perplexed the tiger, but he didn't think too much. It was the lightning that was his goal. He intended to use it as a means to refine his body. He had already brought numerous essence-rich treasures for a long stay here because he wouldn't leave until his power upgraded. And like this, Reiko's anatomy refinement once more took place. The tiger was struck over and over again, only managing to survive because of the resources that he brought. But what didn't know was that each time he was struck by lightning, the remnant lightning essence would be absorbed into his body along with the herbs that he devoured. Time was fleeting, and eventually 10 months passed. It was at this time, when Reiko was contemplating giving up, thinking that his secret strength was a one-time upgrade, that there was a sudden change. A familiar burst of energy exploded out all over his body, bringing an exquisite feeling of comfort that felt even better than the last time. The previously whimpering Reiko stretched out and let out a tyrannical roar that seemed to demand that all those that didn't submit must die. As his body healed, charred black fur fell off his body, with new fur that was even more golden and silkier than before replaced the old. His claws and fangs became sharper and more menacing, and even his previously green eyes changed, gaining a hint of gold and a king's dignity. The tiger grew another meter and gained denser muscles that made him look like a fledgling behemoth. The final change on the tiger was the king character on his forehead becoming more pronounced, no longer looking like accidental markings. Looking at the now twitching tiger that was undergoing the impurity cleansing part of the breakthrough, one couldn't help but anticipate his future. 14 comments, 0 vote. Sorry Death, you're not my type. Boom. A ball of fire crashed into the ground near the dancing tiger, nearly charring his fur despite its resilience. At this moment in time, Reiko and Draco were fighting again. God knows how many times they had been fighting ever since Reiko's last breakthrough that made him a rank 7 magic beast with the fighting prowess of a rank 9. Although he had the ability to go head-on with Draco, he never won. He wasn't even able to gain an advantage despite the fact that his martial ability was stronger and Draco was still only rank 4. Something that caused the prideful tiger great humiliation. This result could only be explained by Draco's Law of Fire foundation. Since his mana was formed from the laws of fire, each breakthrough in the magic beast realm, body refinement realm, refined his body with the best flames available, making his body extremely powerful. And if he had the capability to actually use the essence of those fire laws to attack instead of having to convert it into regular fire elements, talk less of magic beasts, even a spirit beast would vanish from a single ball of fire whether it hit or not. But as it stands now, Draco didn't have that ability to summon forth a lick of fire laws at all. He and his future generations would die first. Henceforth, he had to dilute the laws of fire into the fire elements, but as a result of this, he had endless flames to use. One essence of fire law equals 10,000 elements of fire, so you can imagine. However, this didn't mean you could recklessly use large amounts of energy just because you had it in your core. For energy to leave your core, it had to pass through your mana circuits or whatever you had as substitution, so you had to be careful you didn't destroy them by being reckless. The fight between Reiko and Draco could be considered one of their biggest ones yet, and things were getting intense as they tussled through the forest without being aware of where they were going. Something they would come to regret. As heads butted, claws flashed and fangs snapped, the smell of the surroundings began to change, indicating that they had entered someone's territory. When someone claimed a territory, the longer they lived there, the longer the territory was affected by them depending on their strength. Minor things like a minute change in smell that any beast could sense was one of them. Unfortunately, the two fighters were too busy to notice. Somewhere in the central eastern forest, northern territory. The location was dark because of the towering trees that covered the skies, but two things could faintly be seen. First was the decently sized pond that twinkled from the few rays of sunlight that made it through the canopy. The second thing was a colossal-sized silhouette that towered over 10 meters and emitted a daunting aura that would cause the hearts of anyone watching to skip a couple beats. Strangely, there were two objects that faintly resembled tree branches standing erect at the top of its head, but it didn't take away from the impact of the scene in the slightest. The colossal being suddenly twitched as if it noticed something and swung its head in a certain direction. Where a pair of eyes should be, two white menacing lights that could cause some of the most vigorous youths to suffer from heart attacks slowly appeared. Those two stinking rats actually dare. Reiko leapt to the left, narrowly dodging Draco's bite before lunging at the snake's neck and pinning him to the ground. Reiko grinned with glee. This was the first time he obtained the upper hand. As he brandished his claws in preparation to strike, flames suddenly erupted, covering the entirety of Draco's body like a protective cloak. Reiko grunted with frustration before jumping off. Death wasn't his type, so he mostly refrained from actions that suggested he was trying to court it. Burning seemed to be one of the things that got Death's attention, so he had no qualms retreating. Draco majestically raised his head akin to a proud dragon, his blazing eyes and fiery mane making him look supernaturally beautiful, the disdain in his eyes making him look like a king in front of a slave, and the roll of his tongue as he hissed making him look menacing. All of these features fused to create a heart-stopping image that would make onlookers pause with awe as a feeling of submission rose in their hearts. But Reiko didn't appreciate the view at all. He roared with dignity, easily negating the charming effect that Draco emitted. His golden fur sparkled and his claws' fangs gleamed threateningly. His looks didn't lose out to Draco's in the slightest, and as a king of beasts, the aura he had was more oppressive and charming, surpassing Draco's, who had his big sister Jorma as a role model in his heart, preventing him from having thoughts of being king. Just as they were about to clash again, Reiko finally noticed something, causing him to sniff tentatively. Single quote exclamation mark. Single quote. The hairs on Reiko's body slightly raised in mild alarm, causing Draco to realize that something was wrong. Reiko had finally realized that they were in an unknown territory and he didn't know the owner's strength, causing him to be wary. On the other hand, Draco suddenly choked on his hiss and started coughing. His eyes bulged and his pupils narrowed to pinpricks. His scales suddenly lost its luster and the flames around his body were immediately doused. Even his half-flame half-hair mane lost its magnificence, looking rough, dry and tangled as if he had become an old man. Without hesitation, he sped away at full speed, the picture of despair clearly visible on his face. Reiko wasn't dumb at all and realized that the evil snake must have recognized the owner of this territory, and the owner must have been a terrifying one for the sinister snake to have run like that. Anything that could cause that snake to look like death had feelings for him wasn't something Reiko had any interest in meeting, so he turned and ran.